Hey, everybody, Patrick Connor here, and welcome back to the Knuckles and Gloves podcast. End of the year. End of the year, and I'm here with my dude, Aris Pina, who's, of course, combi box operator, but just a fellow boxing guy like myself. We're talking some end of the year stuff, but also kind of bidding a fond farewell to Showtime Boxing. It's been a heck of a year, so got some stuff to say. Aris, how you doing, man?
Everything is good, bro. How was your holidays?
I mean, it's stressful. It's crazy. There's a lot of shit going on. Normal stuff. Normal stuff. But how was yours, man?
Same, dude. I went back to go visit my dad in Massachusetts, which was nice and relaxing. And that was about the gist of it, man. I don't really celebrate the holidays like that because there's just a lot of people around in New York, and then I leave there, and it's just traveling back to Mass and then coming back, and just I don't know. It's just a stressful time, but
For
all is good.
sure. Yeah, it's a little bit different when you have like kids and shit, you're
Yeah. Definitely, definitely. I mean,
and
if I
all
have
that
one
shit.
day, yeah. If I get kids one day, then I'm sure that whole perception will change again. But at this moment, I'm kind of indifferent to all these times. Even though I look forward to New Year's because I do have fun on New Year's. But regardless, um, speaking of the year, we had a hell of a year for boxing. 2023 was pretty incredible.
Yeah, dude. Started
One
out with a
of the
real
ones we've had for a number of years, and oh, listen, if you're a boxing fan, you're a jaded fan. You get it. You just already expect disappointment. It comes with the territory. You know what you're getting into, and you get your hopes up for many things and always come out disappointed 99% of the time. Um, there's just various reasons for why, but you always stick with it because you're just addicted, just because we are. We're just degenerates, excuse me, for the sport. And with that being said, though, it was almost like all these years of being used and abused for a minute, like we were finally rewarded with a hell of a year in 2023.
yeah, I think there's probably excuse me, there's a tendency to if anybody knows either of us at all, right? They probably know us as the kind of boxing history, weirdos, the guys who pretty much like boxing history or whatever. And there's probably going to be an assumption that we are going to have a bias toward fighters from other generations or other eras or not like modern fighters or contemporary fighters or whatever. And I get that. Like I understand how logically people would draw that conclusion or whatever. But the fact of the matter is even us weirdos, us guys who are sitting here wringing our hands over some shit that happened 75 years ago or whatever, we can still acknowledge that the last few years have actually been really good. There are a lot of people running around, look, see what PBC did. They killed Showtime too. So and so killed HBO. We got no HBO boxing. PBC killed Showtime. It's in the shitter. People are looking like it's about to. It's like a cycle. Every couple of years, we get this shit where it's circling the drain, and then sure enough, something new happens. It's just how it goes. Boxing adapts. Boxing's never going to go anywhere. So,
I'm still on Twitter. Sorry, like
oh,
just think
dude, I'm barely even there. Like,
same thing, man. I just kind of post randomly here and there, but it's like why what because that's basically what you were just saying is everything that's always being said on Twitter and just the nonsense and the argument all the time.
yeah, I'm not trying to play like I never say anything negative like that. That'd be
Oh,
stupid. You could literally just look at my social media posts. But I mean, but I'm fully capable of saying like, look, dude, something is good, and it's okay that it's good. We can acknowledge that it's good, and it's all right to celebrate it. And the point is, after that the miniature rant, 2023, the past few years have been very good, and 2023 is a calendar year for boxing. Started out with a real sprint. I can't remember what exact date it was, but it was like February 20 something. I remember tweeting at some point, holy shit, like we've gotten like 8 weeks or 7 weeks into the new year and we already have like 5 6 fight of the year type contenders. What the hell's going on? And part of that is blind luck. Some of it's matchmaking. Some of those fights were not meant to be that competitive, but they just were. That's fine from a fan perspective. I'm not going to complain. But point is, the action's been great. We've gotten a number of kind of unification type fights for the undisputed championship, which is the kind of thing that fans have been fucking whining down to their britches about for years, and they got it. We got one of the fights that we were whining about in Crawford Spence. We got that. And on top of that, many of the other Gervonta Davis versus Ryan Garcia, which wasn't as competitive, but a big fight. We got a number of the kinds of blockbuster type of fights that we had been asking for as fans and demanding from a competitive standpoint. And then we also got a whole lot of really good fights. And then on top of that, to kind of top it off, this whole fighter of the year discussion or whatever, all of the guys, well, and the women too, for that matter, all of the fighters in the fighter of the year discussion are legitimately really good fighters. Like, it's a bit early for most of them to say they're like, all time type shit. Let's get off the fucking Terrence Crawford comparing him to all time great welterweights type of shit. Like, relax, settle down. But clearly a very, very good fighter. Alexander Usyk, really, really good fighter. Naoya Inoue, perhaps the greatest Japanese fighter of all time at this point, which is saying a lot. So in any case, this is a debate where we're talking about some really, really, really fucking good fighters here, man.
Dude, it's been an incredible year, and I was blessed to work a number of those fights from beginning to end. It's been a hell of a busy year for me. We talked about it a
Dude,
lot.
you've been working your ass off, bro.
Yeah, because almost every Saturday you would like you message me about a fight, and I'm like, oh yeah, I'm counting so and so at the moment. And you just kind of like, oh shit.
Yeah.
Uh, yeah. So, but like you said, man, it was a year that like a lot of fights that we didn't think would be made ended up being made. Terrence Crawford and Errol Spence. How long has people been clamoring for that fight? Years upon years for now. And I don't know if it was a little past its expiration date, who knows? But like they finally got together this year, and no one thought it was going to happen. It finally did happen. A lot of players involved to make it happen, but it finally came to fruition. And Crawford asserted his
Mostly
dominance.
Al Heyman,
Good for him, absolutely. And as much as people want to hate on PBC, but like,
naming my nest pet Al.
yeah, Al, you had Showtime that helped out, and everyone that kind of came together, and Crawford, finally being a free agent, being able to work together for that. It finally came together, and Crawford asserting his dominance in that one performance that he just beat the shit out of him incredibly. That made him one of those that people look at him as a generational talent.
Sure doesn't make Top Rank look good in that situation,
Absolutely fucking not. Definitely, definitely
which we
not.
had brought up at the time on podcasts. But man, sheesh.
Yeah, it's been kind of a rough year for Top Rank. I mean, it's I don't know. They've had a number of successes, but at the same time, they lost Crawford. They had whatchamacallit, Lomachenko losing a really, really highly disputed decision to Devin Haney, other stuff like that. But I mean, at the same time, they're still promoting maybe the best fighter on the planet in a way, depending on how you want to look at it, and a number of other top flight guys. So I mean, it's not like they're going anywhere. As much as Rick Glazer in saying that they're about to be sold to what are they, TKO Endeavor, whatever it's going to be.
Yeah,
Yeah, I
well,
don't know.
he's also been predicting the imminent demise of PBC for like I don't know how many years now. He's like next month, Waddle and Reed. Like he'll just
Yeah,
say
I'm not
Waddle and
sure when.
Reed
I'm
over
not
and over.
sure if he was on Twitter back when PBC first existed, but I'm sure ever since PBC first
He
became
would
a
have fit right in.
yeah, yeah, whatever. I don't know, man. What a piece of shit he is, anyways. But back to
Correct.
the yeah, back to but the banner year, though, like you said, it was just a bunch of great fights that happened. Whether they're like mega fights or not, it seemed like back to back, we were just getting blessed all the time with like incredible weekends where everybody can just talk about it in the next few days and just get excited about what was to come.
And not to pick on Top Rank or single them out either, because there are, I mean, at least on my part, there are some personal kind of bones I have to pick or whatever. But again, not to single them out because Golden Boy had a couple of hiccups this year too, and that's not even talking about the figurehead who just can't keep his fucking shit straight publicly, like at all, in any way whatsoever. But also Matchroom, dude. Matchroom took some pretty big hits this year. Their reputation took a pretty big hit with Connor Ben and all of his bullshit,
Right.
and their ongoing relationship with that. And then on top of that, there's this kind of veneer of this of Saudi Arabia and their money creeping in. I mean, they're nah, I don't know about creeping in. They're locked in. They're locked in. So that's something that I think a lot of people are really reluctant to delve into, and a lot of these kinds of things, and including the Showtime situation with PBC. I think for a lot of fans and a lot of media, they believe that that casts a shadow over boxing's future in 2024. Me, I'm not really so sure. I think that there's still a lot of shit that's left to be developed, and a lot of these companies have been around for a long time for a reason. They're really resilient and figure out ways to do shit. But that being said, yeah, dude, a lot of stuff going into 2024, at least action wise, a lot of the stuff we're talking about, or I was just mentioning, this is like business nonsense that you have to be really a fan to be into and following. And even a lot of massive, hardcore fans don't give a fuck about it. Understood. I'm kind of with you for the most part. Action wise, in terms of just the fights and the level of fighters and everything, 2023 was good shit, dude. That's just the bottom line. I don't really care too much about naming fight of the year, fighter of the year, at least not in like a firm sense. Like, all right, this is my fighter of the year. It doesn't really
Mhm.
matter. We used to do that in years past, but I think we're kind of just not really into that shit at this point. However, I do still want to talk about it. I am curious because there has been a somewhat lively debate about the fighter of the year, the potential fighter of the year in the past few days, as there always is at the end of the year. But I think there are some legitimate arguments here and there. Some people believe it's Terrence Crawford because of his massive win over Errol Spence. But the knock against that is that was his only showing in 2023. Massive showing, but his only showing. Whereas other people are saying, look at Naoya Inoue. He, unified twice on two division undisputed champion. And then on top of that, fought a fairly high profile fight against Steph Fulton that many people felt was going to be competitive and simply wasn't. Um, some people feel that his breadth, his bulk or whatever you want to say is a little bit better than others. Yet others might look elsewhere. I think some people are looking toward Devin Haney too. No big argument, but I don't really know that he's in the argument with Inoue and Crawford personally. But I don't know. What do you think?
I mean, we were discussing this before the show, and it's just something that it hasn't happened many times in history, but has happened before. That like there are times when you can kind of co-share fighter of the year, and this might be one of those instances. Even though you might have a feeling for one reason or another why whether Terrence Crawford or in a way should be fighter of the year, them being 1A and 1B or just, tied up and just having themselves as co-fighter of the year is not the worst thing on the planet. They both had massive accomplishments of what they were able to do this year. In a way, blasting away Fulton and, unifying the division, moving up the way he did and just dominating and proving himself, like you said at the beginning of the show, potentially the greatest fighter that's ever come from Japan, which is like a crazy honor when you think of like the history that comes from that country in general, is unbelievable himself. But then Crawford, even though it was just one fight, it was the biggest fight you can make in boxing. It's the one that fans have been salivating for absolute years and debating about who is the absolute best at welterweight for supremacy. And had Crawford won the fight, but it was like really close when the people are clamoring for a rematch, I don't think, it would be that much debate in terms of like thinking Inoue was fighter of the year because his dominance was much more clearer. Whereas Crawford, say he won like a controversial decision and then they were going to have a rematch with Spence, it would be that. But the thing is, Crawford absolutely demolished Spence. Like there was no question from the first bell to the end of the fight who was in contention of that fight. Like Crawford just busted him up from the very beginning, just beat the brakes off of him. And the dominance of that and solidifying himself as just the absolute best of his generation. And, in terms of like welterweights and stuff like that, and just that talent and how, where he's at, kind of, that's in people's minds too, saying, okay, he has to be fighter of the year because he's already one of the top fighters on the planet. And he fought the only person that's given him contention in terms of who can act, maybe become the dominant champion of that division. And he beats the shit out of him, just like stops him and dominates him. So yeah, he should be fighter of the year in terms of that. There's been fighters away from years past. We talked about that after just one performance. That win right there solidifies them as maybe fighter of the year. If not, they're in high of contention. So I get it, but there's been past years, like what was it, 1981, when Sugar Ray Leonard stopped Thomas Hearns. In the same year, Salvador Sanchez stopped Wilfredo Gomez. They were co-fighters of the year. 1985, when Marvin Hagler became fighter of the year, and then Donald Curry himself solidified himself as the dominant welterweight, kind of the same way Crawford did, just by like some astoundingly destroying his competition. They were co-fighters of the year. I know I'm missing maybe one or two other ones besides that, but like it's happened before. And so what I'm getting at is that like I would just have them as a co-guys. Like I really can't really break them apart on that much. If you put a gun to my head, I would say anyway, but like them sharing honors is still good in my book.
I'm
Yeah, a lot to
I'm
get.
I'm with you, dude. I think that yeah, just for the sake of like saving people's sanity, just put him as a co-fighter of the year. But if I had to lean one way, it would probably be a new way.
Mhm.
And I can tell you that if a new way got it, Terrence Crawford is going to be the saltiest fucking guy on the face of the planet about it for sure. And I
Very
understand
competitive,
too.
very competitive, and I get it.
And I understand too, because what we were talking about, look, he was in some ways uh kind of done wrong. You know, the ball was dropped between him and Top Rank, and the way that he
Absolutely.
was yeah, but the way that he was promoted in the last few years with Top Rank was not ideal at all. And so he definitely feels like he missed opportunities at that point, which he probably did. And then on top of that, you know, he gets his crowning jewel is his biggest achievement and like in a massive way, like not just kind of like ekes by or shows he's better, but barely, but just absolutely beat Spence. Like gave him no chance, like didn't even let him in the fight. And then the way that he gets rewarded by that, you know, got rewarded financially, which is great, but he did not get rewarded the way that he feels he should, which is with Fighter of the Year. I get it, but you know, I guess the argument that I've seen too, just to kind of close this out, so I'm not belaboring this too much, is I've seen some people argue then that, well, you know, Spence kind of screwed it up because they were going to rematch in December, but you know, Spence, you know, canceled the rematch. He didn't want the rematch right away or whatever. And I'm kind of like, well, that might not be a great argument though, because what if they had rematched in December and Spence looked like absolute fucking dog shit, you know, with respect to him, then that would kind of seem to confirm the suspicion that Spence was very much at the end of his career and at the end of his prime when they fought the first time. Whereas, you know, some other people might say, well, he's got two wins over Errol Spence in 2023. So that's even double that, you know, I don't know. I don't really have an answer for that. So I'd probably go with you. I think that having them 1A, 1B or something like that is probably fine.
Yeah, and there's nothing absolute, and there's nothing wrong with that. You know, both of them had absolute stellar years. One just had one fight, the other had a couple of more, but at the same time, they asserted their dominance over their divisions and asserted their places to be at the top in the world. I mean, like these are talents that like we're gonna end up telling our grandkids about one day. You know, that was like I was around when I saw in a way absolutely destroy so and so, which there's so many guys you can name. That's why I just said so and so, because like just in a
I
certain name.
remember being up at like 5:02 a.m. on a fucking Thursday watching him go to war with Nonito Donaire.
Absolutely. We all would what that first fight when he had his eye socket broken and
It's like,
just
what the
absorbed some of
fuck?
those monstrous left hooks
I'm
that would
sitting
have.
here with like a cup of coffee, like half awake at 5:41, going, "Holy shit!"
And then he just leaves Donaire in a crumpled heap in a rematch, and like
It's
his
wild.
reflexes and everything. He's my favorite active fighter to watch right now. Like he's absolutely beautiful to watch. You know,
He's
there's just something about him with his
scary.
fluidity, his patience, his everything, the combinations that he throws, like his precision. Like he's incredible.
There's
He's
got
incredible.
to be a firm ceiling, and I'm not sure we've seen it, but Jesus Christ,
I mean, like with Pacquiao is obviously like I think frame wise bigger, and you can see why like he was able to grow and things like that. But like I don't know where his ceiling's going to be. He says he wants to stay at 122 for a bit and really clean it up. And trust me, there's guys there. I'd love to see him against Neary next, for instance. And like the way, all right, his last fight against Tapalis, he
Wallace, yeah.
Tapalis, it's one of those things that's like when you have one of those elite guys that when they know they're not really in any type of like present danger, they don't mind taking a few more risks because they know what's in front of them can't do anything with them, right? So they're willing to take maybe a couple of more punches than usual or just settle down and kind of work on things, kinks, whatever. And you kind of got the sense that maybe Inoue was kind of doing something like that in his last fight, even though he was in firm control and beating him down. The way he got hit with a couple of shots, even though he was still statistically like very good on that end, he can't take the same risk against a guy like Neri, who's just like a wrecking ball hitter. You know what I mean? It will come and like was very strong and physically strong, besides having absolute power in his fist, and will come and comes with a different awkward style. And yeah, I'd love to see that next. And I'm sure people in Japan too, obviously, because they have a definite vendetta against that against Neri.
Yeah, there's a number of pretty big, well, I mean, big for him. I wish there were a little bit more clamor for him stateside. I don't know why there isn't, but I wish there were a little bit more clamor for him stateside. On the hardcore tip, for sure, there's a lot of big fights. But yeah, nothing that really moves the needle in the mainstream, unfortunately. But man, what a fucking fighter. Just an incredible fighter. And you have to think at some point he's going to fight somebody where he lands those punches and like they don't hurt them. But thus far, everybody gets hit by that shot and they're like, ugh, what,
Yeah,
where am
it's
I?
say that like eventually he's going to run into his Aaron Pryor.
Sooner or later, bro,
Yeah.
And I mean, it happens. It happens to everybody, and I don't look forward to that happening. I just like watching him fight, and it's good to see.
Well, what we get to look for next year is that a bunch of people say he's probably duck and tank.
They've already been a number of people have already said that. Like, how can you
Who
duck
the
somebody
fuck
who's not in
tank,
the
bro?
same
Who
division?
the fuck tank? Yeah.
Weird, but anyway, no, it's fucking wild. I do have to ask you though, like speaking of great fights and whatnot, instead of going, what's the fight of the year? What was the fight of the year that you worked? What was the best fight you worked this year, you think?
Oh man. I'm gonna be completely honest. Like, I never even really thought about it because a lot of them became a blur. I was working a
I
lot
know
this.
it's different when you're working. You're not like, oh, this is a great action. It's like,
Yeah, I
you
worked
gotta
a
pay
lot
attention.
like here, and that's not. I'm not saying that as a complaint at all. Like, I was blessed that I was able to work so much and be able to watch all these shows and do stuff like that. But like, um, hmm, the Neri against how do you pronounce his last name?
Hovanesian.
Oh, Venetian. That fight was pretty awesome.
Yeah,
I
that
know
shit was
I worked
good.
that one. Yeah, that was in the earlier part of the year, I believe, and that fight was pretty incredible. I worked that one. Um, in terms like I worked some big events too. Like I worked the Tank Davis, um, Ryan Garcia card, and I mean, listen, that wasn't the fight of the year whatsoever. But just in terms of like electricity and watching Davis do absolutely nothing for a round and a half until he finally uncorked one left hand that blasted Ryan in the face and dropped him. That was pretty cool. Like, not even gonna front. Like, that's that type of excitement. You're just kind of like, oh shit, like you knew that was gonna happen, and then it happens, and you're like, oh wow. Being able to watch in a way, and just I'd have to think about it, man. Like, if I really actually did some study and look back on the fights I worked, I would be like, oh yeah, well this one, this one, this one, this one, and this one. But like, I'd have to really actually think about that. You know what I mean? But a better one for me is that like my favorite moment of the year was probably Ngannou dropping Fury, and that was my the fights I worked. That was it's just it was hysterical. It was like exciting. It was just like so many things that just kind of happened at that moment when you saw it happen. You know what I mean? And like seeing Fury just look absolutely flabbergasted at the same time, like hurt and kind of like dazed and confused of the whole series, and then Ngannou like walking up on him, and everyone just going absolutely ape shit. And I'm sure everybody in their house, including all of us, were just kind of like, "Yo," thinking that like an upset could possibly be imminent here because Fury was like grossly out of shape. That was my favorite moment, just seeing him get dropped like that.
The memes and whatnot. Yeah, that was a good moment. And the memes that came from it. Whoever drew that one little drawing of Tyson Fury with his cartoonish fucking whoever drew that, bro, I'll fucking send you money. It was great.
Yeah,
But,
yeah, absolutely.
but I mean, yeah, no, that was God, what an embarrassment that fucking guy is, bro.
It was just the
What a
way he got.
fucking
And that was a
embarrassment.
hard shot, but like, no, the thing about that fight, it wasn't a good fight in general. Like both guys were just really the punch output was meh and everything. But it was fascinating to watch and see that a guy like Ngannou, who's coming out of the MMA, who's coming out of the UFC and MMA, and so many questions. Yeah, he
Yep.
was a beast over there with the hands, but how is he going to be able to handle the heavyweight champion of the world?
Yeah, dude. it was like Fury expected a fighter that was going to have far less technique, and we did too. We thought that
All of
we
us did.
he'd come in and be, you know, like the
Yeah,
fucking like the UFC guys gif, like we thought he'd be doing that shit, and he didn't. He was actually like fairly polished. His technique was really good. And I think that really fucking caught Fury off guard. Like he was like, his jab's good. What the fuck am I doing?
yeah.
Yeah, Fury took a little while to adjust, and I think that he ultimately did adjust, but it was like,
And even when he tried to do like some of his things where he leans all his like weight on you and smothers you and all that, it didn't work against a guy like Ngannou because
that's what really caught me off guard was how good he was inside. Like I was like, yo, like this is
I
some
mean like
almost Riddick Bowe type shit. What the fuck is he doing?
it was interesting at the same sense that it was like, well, in MMA, look, I'm not an MMA expert, but like I know they do like a lot of inside grappling and fighting and stuff like
Sure.
that. So he's kind of used to that stuff and knowing how to maneuver. Like, sure, he can't use his elbows on
For
you and anything.
sure, but that doesn't necessarily always translate to like the
Absolutely.
infighting and boxing, but he made it.
Sure,
That's
he
why I
did
was like,
it. So
whoa.
yeah, that was a fascinating thing to watch. It was just like, holy crap, just to see
Yeah.
that whole thing unfold that way. Very interesting.
Yeah, and I mean, I guess it's somewhat oxymoronic to say, "Wow, it was fascinating, and he did so great," but then like turn around and say Fury's a piece of shit. But I mean, we're talking about like the fucking the entirety of his work here, not just necessarily that fight, dude. I kind of just wish at this point he would just retire, not because I hate him or anything, but just because it's like it's holding everything up. He's not really doing anything, and I'm just kind of sick of hearing about him. I wish he'd just go
I just
away.
hope, like as 2024 comes in, he's supposed to be fighting Usyk at the beginning of the year, and I just hope that that fight actually comes off because if
Me
it does,
too, but I have my reservations.
we all do
Yeah,
because we're
everybody
boxing fans.
should. Like, what do you?
Absolutely,
Yeah,
should. All right, listen. First off, we're boxing fans, so I mean, we're just kind of jaded and we understand the
greedy
territory
belly.
we're getting into. Two, we already know Fury's track record as well. All right, this fight was supposed to have happened already this past year, and then I understandably why the fight got postponed because Fury didn't, incur injuries that he didn't think he was going to get against Ngannou. But regardless, it's supposed to be at the beginning of 2024. We're supposed to
Well,
get
that's
100.
his fault. Like that.
Absolutely, that's
He's
his
came
fault.
in like a slob.
Absolutely,
That's his fault.
absolutely. You don't want to take anybody seriously and walk in there with a guy like that who has wrecking ball power. That's on you. You want to, so
And may I just add one asterisk onto the fucking Fury and Ganu thing, if I might? If I might, anybody, I'm sorry, but the heavyweight championship was on the line in that fight.
oh
I know
no,
people.
you go by the
Sorry.
lineal title of him beating Klitschko and keeping in track with that. He's at 10 defenses right now. Even when he came back and he was like a giant blimp when he fought whoever that guy was, Sefri or something like that, in his comeback.
Yeah,
That's
and
for the
Tom Schwartz and shit.
yes. And when George Foreman beat Crawford Grimsley, Foreman was still lineal champion. All right. Foreman defended that belt against Grimsley. Foreman defended the lineal belt against Lou Savarese. He lost it against Shannon Briggs. All right. Like
Oh, I
Lennox.
know that heats people up so quick.
I get it. I absolutely get it. My dad was absolutely livid. Not so much that Shannon Briggs was lineal champion, the fact that he thought Foreman won that fight. But um, but yes, Shannon Briggs is lineal heavyweight champion, along with being the WBO champ for like a cup of coffee in the mid 2000s. But yes, if you go by like he beat the man who beat the man who beat the man, as I do, as I know you do, as I know some other people on historians and people on Twitter do as well, then yes, Fury has defended all those belts. That title was on the line because of how it was. He's
Yeah,
done
if
whatever.
Ngannou would have knocked his ass out, would people have said, "No, no, Fury's still the champion. He just got this knockout loss." That what?
Oh,
You, come on, like it's.
yeah,
I don't know
and
why people kept
got a
making
ring
that
title
argument.
for that. I think, unless the ring decide not to sanction it, who the hell knows
Who
what that?
care? I don't care if they sanction it or not. If Ngannou would have fucking won by knockout, I'd be calling him the heavyweight champion.
Yeah, a funny thing about Shannon Briggs becoming lineal champion is that a little side note. You remember the ringside catalogs we used to get when all of us were,
I
in
still
the.
have a couple of them. Yeah,
Do you remember those belts they used to have back then? That
yeah,
kind of they were like the leather, looked like the workout belts, but they just had like the plates with the chains on it and all that bullshit.
yeah.
Yeah, Shannon Briggs was holding one of those ringside belts after he beat Foreman, and it said lineal champ or something like that. I don't know who gave it to him or how, like whatever, but like I still It was in a KO magazine or one of those things, and it's one of the funniest things I can imagine because, like, who the hell came up with that? Like, gave him that,
That's
like,
like
shit.
when I can't remember after what fight it was, but after one of his fights, Sergio Martinez, somebody gave him the crown, but it was like the shoddiest, cheapest piece of
Oh
shit
yeah, that
plastic
Burger
crown.
King thing. I remember that. It was after he knocked out Paul Williams or somebody, I think.
Yeah, and people were just like, okay, this fool's like fighter. Why the fuck is he wearing a? And then like the next one, they got like a legit crown made for him because they heard the criticism and shit.
That was a whole nother
Boxing,
one too, man. All right,
fucking love
not to veer
boxing.
off course too much, but yeah, he gets the shitty crown, and not only that, like the announcers underplayed his knockout so badly on that one. Remember that? Like he hits him with the most cracking punch, Paul Williams' most cracking punch you can imagine. Left hand, right hand, and down goes Williams. Oh, left hand, and then they just kind of get quiet,
Dude,
and
that
like,
was like,
and then you just hear Kellerman in the most monotone voice. Well, if it's not the fight of the year, it was definitely the knockout of the year.
yeah, that was like,
That like
that was like the knockout of the decade, dude. Are
yeah,
you kidding
and
me?
barely even and I almost feel like that they got talked to afterwards because who was that? Brian Kenny?
Probably
Yeah, I'm pretty because he started going wild after every type of knockout ever after on every broadcast after he was on that. Like and when
fucking
Brock was knocking out a scrub, and Brown knocks him out,
and
and all
then
these.
Lennox Lewis being fucking like never excited whatsoever ever until the Maskev Rockman rematch. It's
That was
over. It's over. Like I'm like, whoa, dude, you got a grudge, Lennox.
no, that was the best thing I ever heard. He's getting knocked out. Yeah, that's
It's
over.
coming. It's over. Yeah.
And Lampley always trying to talk over those guys too. That was like his bad trait.
He
When he made
needed to deliver the poetry. Like he had to.
if you listen closely to the round 12 of, and this is the last thing I'll say, if you listen to closely to round 12 of Giroff, Tony Giroff, you hear Emmanuel Stewart going absolutely insane. You should just leave him be at that moment because like his commentary was perfect in there. But if you listen close, you hear Lampley still going, he catches another one, and then he goes down, and then like let Stewart just have that because like his commentary was perfect for that moment. The
Yeah,
emotion
he
he had,
captured
everything, and he
yeah,
captured it. Like
he
he
captured
worked.
fan excitement during those kinds of moments perfectly. Like fucking Ward Gotti, the first one. Oh God!
Yeah.
Oh my God! And you're just sitting there watching it, like, bro, you're me, I'm you. Whereas Lampley's like, we're watching history. This is the, and you're like, bro, we don't
But you're
need
like,
that.
I didn't like the fact that he had to just keep on going. Like, and the thing with that one is that like you almost felt because he clearly had a connection with Tony way back in the day. Tony working out at the Kronk and sparring guys, whatever. And like, so you felt him get excited when he hit him with that left hook, and then he got him with the hook, left hook, and like and then James's experience is coming out now. Like he was clearly like knowing how great of a fighter Tony is, or remembering how great he is, like working out, like he was getting hyped about it, and then just Lampley talking over.
Just
But all right,
going
get it,
nuts
get
in the
it, get it.
last minute. Yeah, that was great.
So all right, but back to like that thing. It was I don't know.
Yeah, dude, it was. I don't even remember how we took all that fucking. We somehow went in a line out over there and ended up on. But in any case, 2023, it was a really fun year, dude. There was a lot of really bright
And it makes me
spots.
optimistic for what's going to come this year. All I know is that like I was blessed to work a bunch of fights this year. Hope to work a bunch of fights this coming year. And if we get the same amount of fights, or even like close to it that we did in terms of ones that came to fruition that we've been begging for, they were going to have another solid year again. Like we've all been beat up. We're used to that. We're used to this being like used and abused as fans and stuff like that. But I mean, we did have a bright light this year, so hopefully it keeps on shining. You know what I'm saying?
Look, we got as much as I rag on DAZN for various things, and as much as they often deserve to be ragged on, if we're being honest, like we had a massive production issue where they lost audio for like rounds at a time during the main event on their on their
I thought that was my own thing at first, and then before I saw that,
yeah. It's like, what? And then, yeah, at first I was like, oh shit, my stream's crapping out. And no, they put up a thing, and I'm like, that's not the first time that's happened. Long story short, though, again, I don't want to focus on that because I do want to say that regardless of that, DAZN did do some good things and they were involved in some good things in 2023. And they're kind of picking up the baton a little bit where
oh,
Showtime has dropped it. I mean, not dropped it, but look, the fact of the matter is it got wrenched from Showtime. It didn't, PVC didn't screw anything up. None of that happened. The fact of the matter is that these massive legacy companies, HBO, Showtime, boxing doesn't do anything for them. That's what fans and it's everything to us, you know? So it's tough for fans to understand that it just doesn't move the fucking needle. Nobody cares. Even on DAZN, like generally speaking, you're talking about like fucking Premier League rights and stuff like that on DAZN that are worth hundreds of millions of dollars and in some cases billions of dollars. Whereas, Eddie Hearn gets a fucking thing for $500 million over the course of several years on DAZN, and people are like, what a fucking genius. And you're like, no, dude. Look, boxing is fucking totally overshadowed in months. Years of boxing is overshadowed in months by just football/soccer, period. So it's difficult for people to understand that it doesn't move the needle and that this decision was coming from Showtime. It had nothing to do with PBC, Steven Espinoza, just like HBO decided, dude, subscriptions are where it's at, and boxing ain't bringing subscriptions like that. Same thing for Showtime. It has nothing to do with PBC. Point is, I believe that boxing, like I said earlier, resilient. These companies are going to figure out some way to do some shit. I have absolutely no fucking reservation about that. We've already seen with Amazon, other streaming services are probably also going to fucking pick up, some interest in some of the bigger stars and whatnot. So it's all fucking good for me. And you know what? As much as people trash Jake Paul, he's investing into the future of young fighters by getting involved with USA Boxing, which itself is a fucking awful organization and total shambles. But I hope that he helps with it, because that is really the way to invest in the future of boxing, is to make those kinds of local and amateur programs healthy. So there's a lot of stuff to look forward to in 2024, and a lot of stuff that has a lot of potential. And we should probably, spend more time getting behind that than hissing all over what progress we made. It was good, dude. That being
That's
said, the Showtime business. So, I mean, I kind of was just talking about that, but Showtime is out of boxing as of now.
mhm.
It sucks. A lot of us has really good memories about boxing, but as I was just saying, it has nothing to do with boxing dying or anybody having affiliation with Showtime killing it or anything like that. There's a really rich history, dude. You know what I mean? Going back to the beginning of Showtime, that is, not the beginning of boxing. We won't go there. But there was obviously a need to develop these kind of closed circuit and pay-per-view type of platforms over time as networks started dropping out, of which is we're familiar about now. Platforms dropping out of broadcasting boxing and wanting to get away, sponsorship issues, etc. And so that's really where HBO, TVKO, and gosh, I can't remember what Showtime's first, like what their company, their pay per view arm was called at first. But point is, these two companies stepped up. And one of the main reasons why Showtime was able to gain so much ground during a time when HBO was kicking so much ass was Don King and Mike Tyson. They had a lot to do with that at the time, and that's something that's definitely right up your wheelhouse.
Absolutely. So as you can see, I'm wearing actually an original shirt from the very first show Showtime ever put on, which was, I just love the graphics of it, the fights, just simple, easy. And that was the night Marvin Hagler fought John Luis Mugabe in the last win of his career, and Thomas Hearns absolutely decapitated. Well, I don't want to use that word. That's not nice because what happened to him in an accident, but like knocked out James
He
Shooter.
got though, yeah.
Yes, yeah,
Mr.
bad.
Black Gold got taken
Yeah,
out.
I mean, it was one of those. I mean, like those Hearns left hooks to the body, then that right hand to finish him. But like, it's interesting to think because Hagler was an HBO fighter through and through for throughout the '80s. All right, featured countless times all of his title defenses, even the shitty ones against like Folio Oblahimis or uh what would be another one from that time? Wilfred Scipion, you
Yeah,
know, guys
that's a
like
good
that.
one. Yeah.
Yeah, another one like the Enterfermo rematch. All those were on HBO. Like they had the whole Hagler thing. So the fact that he was on Showtime for their first premiere event against a guy like Mugabe, who was a wrecking ball with an incredible record of all knockouts at that point in a big marquee matchup, that was huge. That's straight out the gate for them. You know what I mean? And it wasn't like they became like a premier competitor to HBO. There was still a clear difference there, like you just said. Like HBO still had Don King at that point, and he had everyone else was still aligned with them. So like they still had Mike Tyson and the other heavyweights at that point. Well, actually, when the first time Showtime premiered as a premiered their first fight, HBO was in the midst of their heavyweight tournament, just to give you, context. So they had them, they had Chavez, they had all the big guys. Sugar Ray Leonard was still working for them. So if he was gonna do whatever, like they had all the premier guys, but like Showtime still for their first years had some pretty significant fights. Like they had this one, Hagler Mugabe ended up becoming an incredible fight, and that was a big show for them for their first one. Um, Donald Curry losing his welterweight championship in a massive upset, one of the biggest upsets of the '80s against Lloyd Hunnigan. That was on Showtime, and this was their early years.
Yeah, and it's funny too, and somewhat ironic, I guess, the fact that there was a proliferation of
Mm-hmm.
world titles around this time. The IBF had just recently become recognized as a major world title. This is something that we're kind of in the midst of going through with the WBO, and people are trying to push the motherfucking IBO into this equation too, for fuck's sake. But but this proliferation of
They've been
world
around as
titles,
long as the WBO, bro. Don't hate them.
it's the four belt era trademark. And so fucking, this proliferation of titles though, um, I don't want to like big up the sanctioning bodies, but it did create opportunities for other fighters, and it did kind of, necessities, the mother being the mother of invention, kind of meant that there was this other space where these other fighters needed platforms. The days of fighters fighting off TV were coming to an end, and that just they're at an end at this point. If you're a world class fighter, you don't fight off TV. That's just you don't. That's not even that's a foreign concept at this point. But at this point, these that was coming to an end, and these fighters needed television platforms and didn't have them, and so Showtime kind of filled that gap. They filled that void. And that's pretty much exactly what happened. But then things started to shift when the star power started to shift.
Absolutely. So, I mean, Showtime had some great fights in the late '80s, even though they were still like kind of second banana to HBO, obviously, and other networks who were still involved in boxing at that point. You got to keep in mind, ABC was still showing fights. They would still show fights more consistently or not up until the mid '90s. NBC, CBS, like they were networks Tuesday night, USA, like there was still network boxing on around, right? But Showtime, like I said, they did have some great nights. Like for instance, they were the ones who aired Evander Holyfield, Michael Dokes, which I consider the best heavyweight fight of the '80s. Holyfield, Alex
Great fight.
Stewart. Like they were in the Holyfield sweepstakes, for instance, in the late '80s, and that was a big get for them. You know what I mean? And um and they were, there was other fights that they aired at that point too. I remember, Jesus, Mayweather Pazienza was on what card? No, that wasn't. Actually, no, that wasn't HBO. That wasn't Showtime. I take that back. But like they were airing guys like that, right? But the shift, like you were just about to mention, happens around 1991. Mike Tyson, like I mentioned earlier, at that point was an HBO mainstay. Don King had all of his fighters on HBO. That was a network he was dealing with since the very early '80s, and Larry Holmes and everything like that. Now the focus comes in 1991, and after Mike Tyson knocks out Alex Stewart and Larry Merchant, on air as he was tended to do sometimes, made his grapes be known that he thought Stewart wasn't a good opponent, X, Y, and Z, yada yada yada. Said a few things about Tyson and other stuff. They're fed up with him. They had been fed up with him for a few years, and at this point, they're like, okay, they gave HBO an ultimatum. They go, listen, either you get rid of Larry Merchant, or we're taking our business elsewhere. HBO, to their credit, stays loyal to Merchant. And thank God, because look at all the years we got to enjoy him as an analyst, right? He's one of the all time greats. But King, as he promised, he took his bags elsewhere. And where is that? Across the street to Showtime. And now Showtime is a big player because not only do they get Mike Tyson, they get like all of King's arsenal. And King, at this point, this is the early '90s, he had all of the best fighters in the world basically at his fingertips. So we're talking Terry Norris, who made a name of himself on HBO, fighting a number of guys and making a number of appearances. Now he's on Showtime, more like specific, staying there now. You have Julio Cesar Chavez, who is basically the best pound for pound fighter on the planet. Now he's going to be on Showtime. Like there's a lot of big guys that HBO lost now, and Showtime is going to be able to feature.
Yep, fucking King and his whining about Larry, pink colored prevaricator. Fucking
He was
I,
always
I
so full of words, isn't he?
what's that?
I said he was always colorful with his insults and words to people he didn't like.
He's just crazy. I mean, I kind of get it because look, dude, Larry kind of was a hater. There were certain fighters that he did kind of seem to take a personal dislike to and would go out of his way to needle them. Some of
Sure.
them deserved it. I'm not saying that they didn't, but like he didn't like Bernard Hopkins and he would needle the shit out of Bernard Hopkins, mostly at a certain point in his career because he stuck up for him at least on the Trinidad broadcast. But like,
He had to.
yeah, I mean, you have no fucking choice because George Foreman in like round 10 talking about, oh, he's got to be careful. Felix Trinidad's creeping up on him. And Larry's like, what the fuck are you talking about, George? I'll give him that credit. But yeah, like you said, it was like not really much choice. However, there were times when it was like, dude, you really got it out for this guy. And he didn't like Tyson. He didn't like Don King. Again, understandably, he didn't like Floyd Mayweather. Again, in some ways, understandably. But it was like, it's not really your job to do what you're doing when you're doing it. And that's why I kind of understood Don King's complaint at the time. But you also can't go to HBO and be like, get rid of this guy who's like a legacy fucking media guy who worked in Philadelphia for, and that's not going to happen.
Thing with
So
HBO's almost from the very beginning. Like it wasn't like Merchant was picked up at some point in the mid '80s and just became, one of those guys. He was on the broadcast from the very, very early jump. Like he was actually working the ones with Don Dumphy, like the very early broadcasts on HBO. At the point when HBO was such a new entity in the whole thing that they were airing WWF shows from Madison Square Garden, like some of their big house shows like that. They were just kind of picking up whatever they could, and no one thought of them as anything because at that point, network boxing was still the big thing going on. You know what I mean? Like what was HBO at that point? Who was going to have a subscription to anything when you can just watch any like Wide World of Sports or any of the other channels at that point? So yeah, I see their loyalty as they have with Merchant, and not only that, they would have to do that because what would that show them that they would let a promoter bully them into firing one of their mainstays?
exactly. Yeah, then that sends the message that all you have to, if you're a promoter, all you have to do is complain about something the broadcaster said and they're gone. And you
Exactly.
can't, as a network, you can't set that fucking precedent. That's not something you could be doing. But like in any case, yeah, moving forward, dude, into the 1990s, I think a lot of people probably would have they would not have known, especially because like you were talking about, you mentioned on a number of different shows, like people had black boxes and shit like that. So they wouldn't really be paying close attention to like the production quality between
Sure.
HBO and Showtime. That's something you would probably, since you worked in production, pay a little closer attention to. But it seemed like Showtime was willing to shell out the money and the production was good, but not as good as HBO. However, there were instances where you could see, like, okay, they're shelling out for that fight. So obviously there's some money going through here. And so I was looking because I was curious, like, how long have they been owned by CBS? Have they been CBS since the beginning? No. I actually didn't even know. They fucking launched in Escondido, which is just north of San Diego and fucking weird. But yeah, 10,000 subscribers at first and basically was owned by Viacom. So yeah, I guess that makes a lot of sense. But in any case, that's why it's in the early 80s, that's when they started doing 24-hour programming scheduling and shit like that. And I remember, oh, excuse me. Jeez. I remember yeah, it comes with fucking having a massive beard, I guess. Um I remember like in the early 80s, dude, we used to get like a package, like a cable like package because we had cable and my parents used to love movies and shit. So we would get like HBO Cinemax and Showtime and shit like that. But at least for us, like Showtime was like the throwaway one. Nobody watched the Showtime because all the good movies were on HBO and Cinemax and shit. I'm just saying. And it's still kind of that way to be honest. But Showtime picked up the fucking, ran with the ball with the boxing the last few years for sure.
It was interesting the fact that like all right when in the early '90s, so Showtime, that's so after King becomes the main provider of like fights and content for Showtime, that's when I become a fan. I think around the same time that's when you did, and many of us on around the same age I think kind of come of age the same thing, right? Like we all became fans around that same time. Might have been different era, various years or whatever it is, but we all became of age around the Don King era of Showtime. And yeah, it was, right out the gates. Like there was so many memories I could think of that I was just kind of like, wow, that I would like my first experiences with Julio Cesar Chavez was because of Showtime. My first experiences with Hector Camacho was because of Showtime. First learning about Felix Trinidad because of Showtime. You know what I mean? The Mike Tyson debacle of everything when he comes out of jail and everything like that was because of Showtime. But like it was it was one of those things that like I had a lot of memories as a kid because there was just it was I knew like for instance like HBO was the first one I watched and I was already like used to them even their pay-per-views and like knowing how they had their pre-packaged everything like that. But then like watching Showtime, I just knew there was an alternative. I wasn't really sure what they were at first, but like I started distinguishing like the announcers. Okay, that's the HBO guys. These are the Showtime guys. Like and like just knowing what I was watching and all that. But like there was so many memories of myself, for instance, that like during that era where I would just be like, "Holy shit, man! Like this is like near and dear for me." For instance, like the first time I ever watched Tommy Hearns was because of Showtime. And that was during that time when he was on his comeback and just making random appearances on Don King undercards buried and just blasting dudes. I think I forgot the guy that he fought. Jeez, just off the top of my head, it wasn't Andrew Mater because that was the top ranked show, but something Ward or something like that. But anyways, Tommy scored a first round knockout, and that was the first time my dad ever got like excited. I remember
Mm-hmm.
like seeing him like super excited before a fight, and he was like, "Yo, you need to watch this with me like really quick. This is Thomas Hearns." And I was like, "Who's that?" And he was like, "He knocks everybody out when he hits them the first time with the right hand. When he hit the guy with the right hand, the guy turned spaghetti." Like that was like, "Holy shit, my dad's right." It's like this is incredible, you know. And it just created a lot of great memories. You know what I mean? Like a lot of my favorite fighters were cultivated from there, like Terry Norris, for instance. He became one of my all-time favorites, and I watched him from watching stuff on Showtime. But that being said, we got to keep her in perspective. That was an interesting era because there was so many all-time great fighters, and King is being lauded over the years, and rightfully so to a degree, about putting all these stacked pay-per-views that everyone like remembers and um, reminisces about, right? And so like there's a few of them that I can get on. Like for instance, you can talk about like the Mike Tyson Razor Ruddock ones. One of them had I think Maurice Blocker, Simon Brown as the main chief undercard. The other one was like fucking Jeff Fennick against Azuma Nelson. Those are incredible fights amongst themselves that in this day and age would probably um, be their own pay-per-view main event, especially in this era. But they were just the undercard of like a Tyson, the Tyson fight. That's pretty awesome, you know what I mean? And then you look at Revenge of the Rematches, which on paper is one of the most stacked and most incredible cards in boxing history. How it actually unfolded is another story, but like on paper, it's an incredible thing. But then you get to actually what he was providing on Showtime during that era too, and you're just kind of like, and that's how I look at it. Like initially as a kid, I looked at everything with like rose-colored glasses. I was like, man, I'm watching Showtime every other weekend, and I'm seeing blah 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 blah. And then like I become an adult, and I haven't seen a lot of these fights in years. And I start looking back, and I was like, man, a lot of this shit that he was actually providing. It shows why you shouldn't have just a central promoter as the network guy because a lot of that stuff was actual ass.
Yeah, because then you're obligated to allow this promoter to fucking, showcase this dude, showcase some fighter against some other total tomato can. That's just
And
how it
he got
goes.
away with it often.
Unfortunately, he did. But there were a lot of other things too that Showtime managed to do. Like, I mean, we'll get into the kind of later years. But like you
Yeah,
said, Tyson Ruddock, that was those fights. I think were both on HBO or both on Showtime. I mean,
they were both on
um,
Showtime pay per view. Yep.
yeah, dude. Like there've been a number of fights over the Holyfield Douglas, definitely
Oh,
Showtime.
Showtime. Yeah.
I mean, Julio Cesar Chavez, a bunch, just about all of his fights after a certain point were on Showtime. Um, if you saw Finito Lopez at all fight live, it was almost certainly on Showtime, basically, and after a certain point, Floyd Mayweather switched to Showtime, et cetera, et cetera. There was a lot of stuff that they managed to do
It
even
was
beyond
well
that point.
said. You could see. Well, the other thing too I'll say about Showtime, I forgot to even mention this, is that like they were the first ones that were featuring the European guys that I had never seen, only read about in magazines. I'll give Showtime credit for that too. You have to give them credit for that. So in like the mid '90s, you want to hear about like Nigel Benn or Chris Eubank or Steve Collins and Hamed because they were the first
Yeah,
ones to feature.
Hamed. Yeah, I was gonna say Hamed was on there at first.
Yeah, he was on there first. Like all these type of guys that like you only read about in magazines. And again, this is the pre-YouTube era, so it wasn't like you can just Google them and find footage. Showtime was the first one to feature them. Well, I mean, not Nigel Benn. He was already on ABC and made his America excursion in the early '90s. But like a lot of these guys that you had never really seen too
Ben
much.
McClellan, I was on Showtime.
I was on Showtime. Yeah, I'm talking about like Nigel Benn, like in 1990 against
Yeah,
Iron
yeah,
Park.
yeah.
Like, yes, a lot of those the mid '90s when they were going through those things. Like you had the second Ben Eubank fight, which was massive, massive, massive in the UK. Like one of the biggest fights you can in their history at that point. That was on Showtime. Like you said, Ben McClellan. I watched that with my dad. That was on Showtime. Steve Collins when he finally beat Chris Eubank, he was featured on Showtime. And then you had like other, just a lot of those guys that you normally would not see. They were always featured on there, whether it was like a connection with Don King or whatever it may be. But like, it was interesting to, in a sense, to watch that. I was just kind of like, holy shit, this is a chance for me to see a guy that I normally wouldn't be able to see. And HBO wasn't the type of network that featured those guys. Like at that point, HBO was starting to give out those contracts where they were just featuring their main performers or like networks that they were kind of dealing with, whether it was like main events or Top Rank, who is being a major content provider for them, and others like that. So Showtime was a good alternative if you wanted to see like a lot of guys overseas, or like you said, like the lower weight guys that Don King might have had controlled, or like fighters that you normally wouldn't be able to see. Like Ricardo Lopez was in the top 10 of everybody's pound for pound list for the majority of the '90s. And like you said, the only time you were going to watch him was on Showtime. Even if they weren't competitive fights, and 99% of the time they wasn't because he was just beating up some scrub from wherever in the straw rate
Yeah. And the
ratings.
fact that he didn't unify is a pretty big knock too, but nonetheless, great
Yeah,
fighter.
and that's mind-boggling too when you really think about it, because like the only time he did, which was on a Showtime pay-per-view, was when he knocked out Alex Sanchez. And I don't even know if Sanchez was still the WBO champion at that point, but that was the only time he did that. And then when he moves up to 108, and then he beats up Sorvoropin, and he beats up Zolani Patello and everyone else, you kind of think to yourself like, he could have done this at strawweight and just whooped all these guys initially. And the only one he did like is Alex Sanchez, and then Rosendo Alvarez, which again was on another Showtime pay per view, and that was a compelling series that they were able to air. But like Showtime was good for airing little guys before HBO did, because HBO got into it with Boxing After Dark. They were really good at airing overseas guys during those mid '90s times, and like just airing guys that you normally wouldn't be able to see. The Hamed stuff, for instance, he was more of a surprise when he first came on. I've mentioned this on the show before, but like that card initially when he fought Daniel Alicea, he wasn't supposed to be the main event of that card. The main event of that card was supposed to be Terry Norris against what's his name? Vasquez. Julio
Julio
Cesar
Cesar
Vasquez.
Vasquez. Yeah.
Julio Cesar Vasquez. That was supposed to be the main event, unification of the junior middleweight crown, which would have been a hell of a fight in itself. But I think Norris caught the flu or whatever may have happened, and the fight fell apart immediately. Like within that week, it fell apart, right? And I didn't know about that. I just kind of watched it, and then when it came on when I turned on the TV that night to watch Showtime, thinking I was going to watch that fight, and mentioned that, and it said instead they're going to show Nassim Hamed. I wasn't expecting that. Probably anyone else that was watching that night wasn't expecting either. And we got our first glimpse of what would become with him. He got dropped. He did his whole shtick when he came into the ring, scored a spectacular knockout where he laid Alicea completely out. It was incredible. And look at the undercard of that fight too. So I mean,
Can't remember who it was. I want to say it was probably Frank Warren, but I don't know who it was who was promoting Hamed at the time, but I know for certain that
I think it was Warren.
it was right around that time and in the years after that was when Showtime really got into business with Frank Warren, or did more business with Frank Warren, because he was the one who was looking after Ricky Hatton. He had some sort of involvement with Joe Calzaghe, and a number of those fighters who we otherwise would not have seen in like the late '90s and stuff like that. Those
Yeah.
are fighters that we were exposed to. And for a lot of American fans, they didn't want to be. A lot of them were fucking endlessly whining about it. Dude, some American fight fans just cannot handle British boxing. Like they just hate it. Like they hate it. It's fine,
Yeah.
but in any case, no,
I
Showtime
mean,
did.
some of those cards were kind of rough to watch in the late
Now, I'm not
'90s.
gonna lie, some of them weren't good. You know, what was one that I can recall off the top of my head? Calzaghe versus Will McIntyre. Shit was
Ooh,
bad. That was
that
a
was on my
bad.
birthday because that was the main event was Mike Tyson against what was that blob? Brian Nielsen.
Yeah, Brian Nielsen. Oh god, that was a bad card, dude.
Yeah.
It's
Oh
a
yeah.
bad card. But
Well,
I
I mean, all
mean,
right, I got one for you. You ready for this one? This was like 97, 98 or something like that. Fabrice Tioso against Terry Ray. Terry Ray, all right? If
yeah, put any in
try
either
to
of the
describe that guy, but if
Tioso.
you just like if just go on BoxRec and look at his record, he's one of those middling cruiserweight heavyweights of like the mid '90s from I don't know where he's from, but he wasn't good. And the fact that he got a title shot, I don't know how, but he
Yeah,
got
no.
flattened in like 40 seconds, and then you, for Showtime because they had to like kill time. Not only did they had to interview Tioso, they had to interview Terry Ray and like show like the knockout over and over to him why he got blasted with Angelo
Walk
Dundee.
us through this, and you're like, oh shit.
Yeah,
Yeah, that was definitely one aspect of Showtime broadcasts that I was not super enthused about. Bobby Ches, not a massive fan, as anybody who listens to Bryn and I fucking talk knows. We're not a big fan of Bobby Ches, but yeah, dude, either of the fucking Tiozzo brothers, like get them the fuck off. I don't want.
there was, but again though, it still served as like one of those alternatives back then that you were like, wow. I mean, I'm talking about during the Don King era. He was still and because Frank, I wasn't just clearly King because at this point Frank Warren, like you said, was promoting cards, and that's how you're able to see these UK guys being featured. And it was a good alternative, all right, because like we knew at HBO, all right, you're gonna watch James Toney before he kind of fell apart. And then it became Roy Jones, um, George Foreman, Riddick Bowe, Holyfield. You know, like you knew what you were getting with HBO and those premier guys and stuff like that, De La Hoya and others. But then with Showtime, you knew now, okay, if I'm gonna watch Showtime tonight, we're gonna see Trinidad. You're gonna see Ricardo Lopez. You're gonna see like there was just like this whole like base of who's across the street and stuff like that, you know. And then when Tyson came back in the mid '90s, um, it was an exciting moment too because you know he signed with King immediately when he came out, and then he was being featured again on Showtime. You know what I mean? Showtime at that point, to give them credit, like they were the ones who kind of controlled the heavyweight division. Like, yeah, George Foreman was the lineal champion, but Showtime had the stars in its own weird way. Like, you know, Bo and Holyfield were deteriorating each other, right? And we didn't really know what was going on with that. George Foreman was just middling around and struggling with guys like Axel Schultz. Mike Tyson was coming out of prison now and blasting out.
Yeah, obviously we can look at that now and be like, oh god, that was awful. But at the time, people were like, that's what we want to see, you know?
Yeah. And then you got Showtime now though because they have the momentum during this era. Where because you got Tyson coming out, he blasts out Frank Bruno, and then he slaps around, you know, Bruce Seldon and others and stuff like that. And now he's like now he's become a champion, even though he's not lineal champion. He's look, he's the most popular fighter on the planet, and he's back, and like all these guys are petrified of him, and yada yada yada. And it's like, and then when he loses to Holyfield, even then, that's still big business for Showtime because like that was one of the biggest upsets you can imagine. Now they could parlay that and rematch and everything. Like they were doing well for themselves during that point. And again, this is still just during a different era. Like they're doing very well for themselves, but you still at me because like I still looked at them as like you know the B level, not B, but like you know one step like below where HBO was. But like they had massive success during that era. They really did. But with all the you know big pay per views that they were putting on and stuff like that, man, there was a lot of dreck in there, and they needed a change because you can't just have one person just dominating the whole scene or even a couple of people doing that for that matter. Like you just you know there was need for a change, and so like by the late '90s when Tyson was finally fizzling out, Holyfield was like struggling with guys like John Ruiz and other things was happening over there. Yeah, they were still doing things, but like HBO had clearly proven themselves to be like the elite now at this point. They needed a change. And the guy in charge at that point, who had been in charge of Showtime for a very long time, a brilliant mind by the name of Jay Larkin, knew that they needed to do a new avenue, and that's when they started a new era, which was when they wanted to align themselves with any promoters. What was it, like best fights and best?
Fights, not fighters.
Yeah,
That's what that yeah, that was the slogan or like the business slogan or whatever. I don't think it was the official, but like but yeah, well there's a little bit of context and some of that was and I know a lot of people really remember Roy Jones fondly and that's cool, but there was on the business side, he did some damage. And well, some might say that he did some good, but he did some damage because HBO had given Roy Jones this exclusive contract and they had basically put in this contract, well, you know, basically whoever you fight, you're as long as you're fighting on the HBO network and also the other part of that was that Roy was on contract as a commentator on HBO since the 90s too. And so Roy would commentate on a number of these HBO cards. And then he was also on contract as an HBO fighter. And so then basically they gave him these minimum regardless of whoever he was fighting. And he was playing the mandatory game where he had all of these belts and he was just fighting the mandatories of the belts. And so it wound up that HBO televised some pretty shitty Roy Jones Jr. fights in the late 90s and early 2000s, and the nature of his contract being an HBO fighter basically forced both HBO and Showtime to reassess the contracts that they were giving to fighters and promoters because they were kind of being taken advantage of in that regard. Now, it's not kind of fair to totally see it that way because there were a lot of fighters who were still getting shit on in the meanwhile, but it was just, you know, these handful of fighters who were benefiting from these kinds of deals. And so Showtime, I think, saw that and was like, all right, look, you know, the best thing we could do is put on good fights and the fights that people want and not necessarily latch on to one fighter, but be willing to kind of work on a fight to fight basis with fighters. And that's obviously not what happened with everybody because there did wind up being Showtime fighters too. But nonetheless, it did change. It did kind of shift a little bit. And that also led to us seeing in the early 2000s, like for instance, even though Don King was involved with most of them, if not all of them, we saw really good cruiserweight round robin, mostly on Showtime in the early 2000s that nobody ever really talks about or remembers. But there was some fucking brilliant shit in there, bro. Fucking Wayne Braithwaite, big truck. The guy was scary as fuck. Jean-Marc Mormack, fucking O'Neill Bell, who was on ESPN2 a bunch of times and then went to Showtime. You know, there were a number of really good Dale Brown, who wasn't like elite, but among, you know, the contenders, and there were a number of really,
Melvin
really good.
Davis.
Yeah, dude, bro, there was some fucking really good cruiserweights during that time who participated in this kind of Showtime cruiserweight tournament. They did the Super Six, they did the bantamweight tournament. I mean, you know, they've done a number
Oh
of
yeah,
things where the HBO wouldn't really do this kind of stuff. The most they did was the Don King middleweight tournament, and that was not quite the same thing.
absolutely, and also too, Showbox. That's the huge thing for
Oh
them.
yeah, but I didn't. We haven't even brought that up yet. Yeah,
Yeah, not even yeah. That's a story. That's a whole episode on unto itself when you really think about it.
worth its weight in
Um,
gold, bro.
yeah, that premiered in what 2001, 2001 around then.
Something like that. Yeah, I think 2001. Yeah,
Yeah, and no one really knew what that was going to be when it first premiered. Like you know what I mean? We just knew it was going to be like a proving ground type show, and HBO kind of tried to do the same thing with KO Nation,
KO
except
Nation. Yeah,
they're already featuring like world champions and stuff like that. Like like more low profile ones, but like it was that show was kind of just because of the context of how they tried to present it. There was no
it
frills
was
with
some try hard shit, man. Fuck.
yeah, yeah. You know what I mean? There was no frills with Showbox. There was no like, Ed Lover hosting it. There was no like, custom music coming out and yeah, all that type of shit. It was like young prospects looking to try to make a name for themselves, and they were trying to make it on Showtime Championship Boxing or wherever their careers were going to take them. And they were hungry as fuck, and it ended up being like one of their biggest legacies and one of the biggest booms that they could have imagined because look how much it produced for them. That became like their golden era for me, for instance. I mean, like for this after once after the 90s kind of ended for them. You know what I mean? That's when they really started flourishing in terms of like, and it still took a few years. Don't get me wrong. Like not everything just kind of happens at once and all of a sudden, boom, you're the top banana. Like it took a number of years for them. And I'll give you an example. Like one thing they used to do was mind boggling to me when I was younger is that if HBO was showing a massive pay per view, Showtime would counter program them with one of their shows. And I would be like, who is watching? Like, for instance, I don't remember who they were counter program, like what the
And now
HBO
you can watch both at once, but then you couldn't. So it was like, what the fuck are you doing?
it made no sense to me. For instance, I don't know what the major pay per view show was, but I remember that they Showtime counter programmed them with Joel Casamayor against Edwin Santana. I'm like, why? You know, and
I don't understand that.
because no one's gonna watch that. Who the fuck is gonna watch that when I don't remember who was fighting, but I remember it had to have been a huge fight going on there. People, everyone's eyes are gonna be on that, more or less. And I don't know. It was interesting, but like slowly things were like going for them though. Like, and there it was during this point where I would assume that like you were, making appearances ringside for a lot of these Showtime shows in the mid 2000s, but they were bringing a lot of like cool, the Showtime show was like flourishing at this point. So like the early days, like you said, they were showing guys like Leo Dorin, who would become champion soon
Yeah,
after.
they really invested in the lightweight division around that
Yeah,
time.
Ricky Hatton against the corpse of Freddie Pendleton was one of
Oh
the early
God,
shows on
yeah.
there.
I remember
Um,
that.
I think future PBC mainstay Louis Collazo. I think he suffered his first L on Showbox. You had Kermit Cintron was one of the early guys on that show. Like there was a lot of guys that ended up, making appearances early on that ended up becoming world champions. I forgot, Farhood did the historical thing the other day and he dropped all the numbers and all that. But like it it was a proving ground, you know what I mean? And like from there, so you had Showbox that became consistent because like the ratings were good for it and stuff like that. And then early 2000s again was still kind of weird. Like they were featuring UK fighters, but Hamed at this point had gone to HBO and like all the premier guys had gone over there. So like now late at night, sometimes you'd have to watch like a Scott Harrison fight.
The money was shifting like a lot right around this time. Like HBO, I think, had started like throwing way more money. I can't say that for certain. I'd have to look, but that's what it seems like. It seemed like HBO started kind of upping the ante a little bit
It was.
at the
It,
stars anyway.
yeah, they were. It was different, like you know what I mean. But they were still, it was like a transition period because Larkin would pick these fights up, and some of them would be good, but some of them would be absolute shite. Like on paper, Kelvin Davis against who was that heavyweight? Ezra Sellers for a vacant cruiserweight title because both of them are bangers. Looks like it would be a crazy fight on paper, and instead it just became like a thrashing, kind of like a ugh, you know. But that would be like the main event of Showtime, and you kind of like really. But things got a little bit better by the time like 2006, 7, 8 starts rolling around, and like you said, you know. The bantamweight tournament starts coming in. You got guys like Corrales is starting to be featured
Yeah,
now.
the whole lightweight round robin over
Yeah,
there.
and all that type of stuff. So you were around during that time, Pat. You were very heavily in the game, and I think you were writing at that point too. So what was going on?
Yeah, I mean, I think, well, oh, man, God, it almost like gives me PTSD a little bit. But Gary Shaw got in on that fucking shit, unfortunately. At
He
that
got
time,
like
at that
Showtime
time, it
stuff.
seemed like a good thing. Like, because Gary Shaw had a lot of involvement as a promoter with Showtime and got in pretty cozy. How else would he have been able to head up a fucking MMA organization that Showtime got involved?
And have
CBS.
his son be the commentator
How
for it.
the fuck?
Scala.
You know what I'm like? There is no other Of course, he got in good with Showtime because there's no other explanation as to why they would let a total fucking moron like that head up this. He's a total idiot, bro. Everybody knows it. Every single person ever dealt with it will fucking back that shit up. I just got crucified at the time for saying it to his fucking face. But in any case, long story short, yeah, dude. At the time, it seemed like a good thing because he did have connections. He honestly did, and he still had inroads to a lot of other promoters and other fighters, and he had control of some pretty good fighters, or at least some promotional fucking involvement with some pretty good fighters. And that also led to, like I said, this lightweight round robin on Showtime, actually it was kind of more 130 to 135 because Acelino Freitas, Casamayor, fucking, those guys wound up right around that time. And as soon as they're 130 to 135, move up with Corrales, Castillo, there are other dudes who were Juan Lescano, a bunch of other fighters right around this time who were Julio Diaz, a bunch of other fighters right around this time who were right around lightweight that Showtime, they very intelligently, or hopefully not luckily, hopefully there was some foresight in it, was throwing money at these fighters and had these massive and largely entertaining hardcore fight fan type of fights on their network. And that really proved to be a massive boon coupled with Showbox seeming to get a little bit more play and more important and whatnot. They were having Showbox on a Thursday, which was kind of an off day for boxing, but made kind of its own little
What
niche.
boxes on Thursdays?
I know for a little bit it was, yeah. For a bit, Showtime or Showbox was on a Thursday, and then I think they moved it to a Friday for a bit, and then anyway, like for a while there, it was crazy, dude. Because remember, ESPN would switch the days, so there would be Tuesday night fights, fucking sometimes Wednesday night fights, Friday night fights. There'd be Showtime on a fucking Thursday. This is wild shit. And then for a while, ABC tried to do it on Sunday mornings. Remember, for a little bit, they had the little
Right,
Budweiser
yeah,
series.
yeah.
That shit was awesome. Anyway,
I do remember the Budweiser series. Oh yeah.
there were some fucking bomb fights on that. I thought they were going to continue that, and they didn't. That shit was sad. But in any case, yeah, this was all right around the same time too. This was all kind of busting right around the same time, where it seemed like boxing was kind of blowing up. And also another aspect to this was the internet, dude. The internet was changing a lot. And one thing I'll say for Showtime too, that HBO was not doing whatsoever. You might remember this. It might have been slightly before your time, but you might remember it. Um, Showtime was packaging DVDs and other things briefly of their fights to sell. Oh shit! Sorry, alarm. My bad. Turned off. Showtime was packaging, like for instance, they had, I still have it somewhere, a DVD of uh Morales Castillo with a whole bunch of other fights on it that they were just giving out for free at a fight. And then they also on I think it was their website were briefly selling DVDs of a handful of their fights, which I was like blown away because I was like, dude, HBO should have been doing this fucking decades ago and never did. And I thought that was the start they were going to do it, but I think without getting into too much shit, the distribution and the packaging of that kind of shit like costs a ton of money and it's just not worth it. But I thought it was the coolest fucking shit at the time. And so, point being, Showtime was far more dialed into the technological advancements of what was going on in boxing than HBO. Period. HBO, it was like they were old school and business and classy and wearing suits and they had fucking internet. What the fuck is the internet? Whereas Showtime was like, send us your poll. We want to know who you think won with the fucking thing. And then, visit show.com. And HBO was like, we got to mention fucking websites now. And so they clearly seemed far more into what was happening and kind of foresight in boxing and among fans than HBO was. It was just that HBO had the better production, the better packaging, the better, everything. So that really kind of tilted it. But in those mid 2000s, dude, it was cool. There seemed like there was a lot of really cool stuff coming in. To be fair, there was.
Yeah, I mean, well, they ended up airing one of the greatest fights of all time, if not, the greatest. Well, definitely, most people would consider the greatest fight of the century so far in
I
Corrales
was
Castillo.
I was thinking about that. If you go down like the greatest fights of the last 35 years,
Yeah.
a lot of them happened on Showtime.
They really did, man. It's pretty incredible. They had a long lasting legacy, which I'm about to bring up too, and I'm going to ask you like your favorite memories and stuff like that. You know what I mean? But for me, like with Showtime, I'll always have fond memories because besides like watching it on TV and stuff like that, I was blessed enough to
I was going to ask you about this, but yeah, please. I
I
need
was
you to
blessed
go
enough
into
by
detail.
yeah, my first job out of college was with Showtime. I got hired as a PA to be there for like 6 months or whatever it
A
was.
lot of you motherfuckers watching and listening don't know this, bro. Aris has been in the game.
Yeah, so this was back in 2007, and it's like I went to college in Maine, and I reached out to Steve Farhood before I graduated. I was like, "Hey, Steve, you met me at the Hall of Fame, yada yada yada. You asked me when I was going to graduate to reach out to you, so I am. Hope all is well. If you got something out there, let me know." And he just happened to be like, "Hey, we actually kind of do. You want to come out here in a few weeks for an interview?" And I was kind of like, "Okay." So
I was kidding. I didn't know you were.
yeah, like I told like a couple of professors, I was like, "Oh, I'm gonna be out for a couple of days. We're going to New York," and they all just like, "Yeah, that's fucking awesome." Went out there, met with the people and stuff like that. Ended up getting the gig, and so I moved out there, and it was one of those like the thing about that is that like I never thought to myself back then as a kid that like I would be able to see a guy like by this time Bobby Ches wasn't working there anymore, but I met Steve Albert, like I met all the other guys and stuff like that, and seeing their library, how everything worked out. It was pretty incredible. And this was during like the Vasquez Marquez trilogy. This was like during that whole era. So like I was like working on editing and helping these guys like do all that type of stuff. And when it ended, the first fight I got to do was Sam Peter against what's his face? Jameel McCline. And that was a really good fight in itself. All right. Like, much better than anyone anticipated. But it's the stuff that came before that I'll always remember. For instance, that was a night that Madison Square Garden was going to retire the ring, the famous ring that had been the ring for all those countless legendary fights from Ali and Frazier, Lewis. Everybody had been in that ring at some point in time and fought in that absolute ring, right? Then it was going to be retired and get sent to the Hall of Fame where it currently stands today. And they had a ceremony like a couple of weeks before the King card, and they had a lot of guys that have since passed away all show up for it. All the guys that had graced Madison Square Garden at that point. Joe Frazier was there. Joey Giardello, who could barely move, he was there. Like a lot of heavyweights, a lot of famous heavyweights and just famous fighters had shown up at that, showing up to that part. And it was really cool for them all sitting there and like I was running around trying to get coach for them or like trying to like, usher these people here and stuff like that. Basically just being the person I was supposed to be. And like I'm a dude that's only a couple of months out of college and here I am running around Joe Frazier and all these other legends trying to usher them and help them out and do this and that and try it was like mind blowing to me. You know what I'm saying? Absolutely mind blowing. But that ended. But after that ends, and then, I don't really think much of it after for a couple of years, but then I start, working for CompuBox. And initially, CompuBox, people don't know this, we weren't doing Showtime shows for the first few years. Like, when Showtime ever had stats, that was either somebody else or whatever it was. Like, we didn't work with Showtime until around, like, the Mayweather era. But once we started working with them, that's when I started working with them directly, too, and started traveling and working with these guys, or, all the time. And I was blessed enough to be with Lee Groves for the majority of these trips. And we would go everywhere from almost all the Showbox trips to like Canada half the time to work Adonis Stevenson fights or this one or that one. I was ringside for the main event of the Super Six with Ward and Froch. I saw Wilder, this one, that one. You can imagine I was there for a ton of fights for Showtime. And the thing I could say that I used to love about them and what made me so like feel special with them is that those guys made you feel like a part of the crew. They weren't kind of standoffish. They weren't like, stuck up or anything, or made you feel like, you're nothing like that. Like all
In
those
a
guys,
stark comparison to HBO.
yes, absolutely. I can say that with no qualms now. Absolutely. They made you feel like you were a part of them and you're a part of their family and they
Bunch of
wanted you
fucking
there.
dickheads. That's
And it was like, you know, for instance, like with the Showbox crew, Raul Marquez and I are really close. Like I love Raul. He's mad cool. We'll sit there and tell you stories all the time, and it's just very engaging and happy, and just a very happy-go-lucky guy. And if you mention him on Twitter, even if it was 4 years ago, he'll retweet it. um, Barry Tompkins. I grew up watching Tompkins, not on HBO. I was too young for that. I ain't gonna say that, but like watching his videos, those ones he used to narrate for HBO Sports, the boxing ones, right? I had a couple of those on VHS that like an uncle or someone gave me, and used to watch those over and over. Never in my life did I think I'd be working ringside with him, doing showbox shows and other stuff like that. And he being the most gracious and humble guy you can imagine. And if you want to talk about an HBO show from the early 80s that he commentated, would sit there with you for a half an hour and break it down and talk about what he was feeling. That was cool. And then my favorite, obviously, was Steve Farhood because me and Steve go way, way back over the years. But what I'll always just love and always appreciated was that me and Steve and Lee Groves would sit there before shows would start, whether it was HBO, not HBO, Showtime Championship Boxing or Showbox. And when Steve, you know how he always do his historic stuff before a show. If me and Lee were working, he would sit with us for at least a half an hour, 45 minutes, and like go over, and we would all have like a little brain session, just going over everything about history and giving ideas and thoughts and all that. And he would use our quotes and use our shit. And he would even say, he was like, I can't mention you on air, but just know, like, I appreciate all the feedback that you're giving me. And then that was enough for me to know that, like, a guy like him respected me enough that he's going to use me, whatever I would, these things, these stats, and know that I gave him a couple of those.
Well,
Sorry
if
for
he
the
if he
rant,
mentions you on air, then all of a sudden it's like you got your official role changes and you got to get paid more, like
yeah.
by union rules. And I'm not even kidding. So like it's probably legit about that.
But I
But
mean, like, it was just cool in the fact that, like, I was able to do that. You know what I mean? Like, it was a camaraderie, and it was really nice, and I'll just love that shit.
for sure, dude. Like I'm even though I look back at it, like my own experience, like I'm conflicted about a number of things because I was, I had a lot of problems at the time, but without going into that stuff, I'm really grateful about a lot of the experiences I had. And likewise, dude, you had a lot of really unique experiences. Not everybody gets to fucking do that shit. And also you have to think about it like this too. A lot of the people who work production, DAZN, whatever, they're not even boxing. They don't even like the fights. They're not boxing people or life. Get the fuck out of here. Thumbs up.
You put the
Lifelong,
thumbs up.
the fuck is this shit? Yeah, they're not lifelong boxing fans who have like, they might have gotten into fucking doing production on Buffy the Vampire Slayer, but lucked out and knew somebody in boxing. They're people who just like fell into this job because they're just production people. Nothing against them, but like they're not pining for that job specifically. Whereas you lifelong fucking boxing fan, and you got to do something of a dream job, like get paid to be involved in boxing. That's something literally that almost every fucking fan slash media person now wants and fucking lusts for. You know what I'm saying? So we're both really fortunate in that regard.
Absolutely, man. I don't take any of that shit for granted whatsoever. Like, I have fond memories of work at Showtime, HBO for that matter, ESPN shows, NBC. Like, I've worked a lot of shows and I've been blessed to like seen a lot of great fights, a lot of great fighters, and just been around, a lot of important people. But it's like the fondest memories are with Showtime just for a number of reasons. Like, they just really had that camaraderie that made you just feel involved. And when afterwards we all go in the back of the production truck and go eat pizza or whatever they were serving that day. Like, we just eating that amongst ourselves, you know what I mean? And just talking and hanging out. And it was just cool. Oh man, it was just a cool moment. Like, I miss sitting next to Steve and like during while he's scoring the fights, like live during the product, on the show, he'll be looking at the stats because I had to like write them down and like run notes on stuff like that. And he would just kind of look at me and nod and go like Bonham. And like I mean those type of guys made you feel like you were contributing to the show. You know what I mean? Like, it really made you feel like you were like, okay, we're all a team
Yeah.
here, we're all contributing and doing this type of shit together. You know what I mean? Like,
And not to give up like too much personal shit that you and I have talked about, but also, boxing is a very institutional like sport. And so a lot of the people who are in boxing now have been in boxing a long time, and they'll fucking let you know it.
mm-hmm,
They're quick as fuck to tell you. And that's something both you and I have experienced because we started getting into it at a fairly young age. And
sure.
people will remind you that you got into it, that you're young or that you're younger than them or haven't done it as long as them, whatever. And so, that's something that makes you feel good about like, the Showtime crew or whatever, is it never any of those guys that I've ever met, and I've never been close to any of them, so I'm not like you, but like, I've never felt like that with any of them where got talked down to or like kind of felt like, what are you doing here type
Sure,
shit.
sure. Yeah.
Whereas a lot of the HBO people and even some of the ESPN people were like that, dude. They made me feel like shit that I even just wanted to participate. and that's not a good
Yeah, they
feeling.
pull rank on you. They'll pull rank on you and make you think, and you're kind of like, wait,
Yeah,
like,
it's not a good feeling, and it's like because 'cause I'm younger than you, and so I can't even imagine what how that extends to, frankly, people of color, women, people with any sort of disability or whatever. I can't even imagine how they get discriminated against or treated, and it's pretty awful. But point being, circling back to what you said, I never experienced that with any of the Showtime people, dude. They were always welcoming. A lot of those people, even on social media, are like warm and engaging and shit like that. They're not sticking their nose up or like being dickheads, pulling rank, like you said. They don't do that, and so that is an energy that a lot of the Showtime crew brought to boxing for most of the fucking time that it was around.
yeah, and I hope a lot of those people that were involved with the sport, back then, all the production people and stuff like that, like I felt the same way for the HBO crew that, they still land on their feet and they can find whatever support that they can get, whether it's, in their new endeavor with Amazon or whatever it may be, like, they're incredible workers, you know what I mean? And like the announcers, like guys like Bernstein Bernstein's been around for so long, bro.
Yeah, dude.
You really think about it, like,
Fool called Leela
yeah,
Cicero.
I mean, he's always looked kind of like older than what he was, but like, it's the mustache.
Yeah, back when he had the Doctor Strange look going on.
Yeah. But like, Bernstein's really been around since like the very beginning of ESPN. And what ESPN became a thing in what, like 1978,
Yeah, it
79?
was like 79 or something like that. Yeah.
And he's been there since then. Like he's been commentating for God
Fool's seen a
knows.
lot of shit.
Yes, he's Tompkins, another guy that's been around. I mean, Jesus, like he was one of the I don't think he was the original first announcer for HBO, but like he came in around the very early 80s, and it was the iconic voice for so many legendary fights you can imagine from the 80s up until like the very late 80s, you know what I mean? So it's like, yeah, I don't, whether they want to, I know Bernstein's trying to bounce back and he can still commentate and still go wherever he needs to be and stuff like that. Tompkins, I'm not sure if he still would be willing to. I'm sure he would. Yeah, I hope all these guys get Raul Marquez, who
No, he's
I
he's a fantastic commentator
he really is.
and
He's
a
one of
great
my
translator too.
yeah. Him and Roy Jones are probably my two favorites when it comes to like fighters who became broadcasters.
Kevin Kelly was good for a minute. I don't know where he
That
went.
was really good.
Yeah, he
Yeah.
stopped commentating, but I thought he was good for a bit.
I mean, it was perfect for him. The guy can't stop talking to begin with.
Yeah, he is a talker.
Like that was the perfect fit for
A
Kevin.
talker.
Yeah. But no, he had like a lot of those guys. Some of them are not, you can tell they're struggling when they try to talk a little bit, whatever. Or
Yeah.
like, but like Kevin Kelly was really good. The late great Jerry Quarry, before he made his, bad comeback, the 70s, he was a great articulate commentator. Like, you have those guys, you know what I mean? They just know what they're looking at. I love Foreman too. As much as it's easy to rack on him and talk some shit about him, stuff like that, the dude did have some gems.
And every so often he did have good analysis,
Yes.
but it was kind of sandwiched between a bunch of crazy.
Yeah, exactly. But with that being said, we're talking about the history of Showtime and stuff like that. Well, all of us have our own fondest memories. I know a lot of our listeners have like memories that they hold close, near and dear with them. What's yours, Pat?
It's a good question, man. There's obviously we've gone over a lot. So, I mean, I'd say running at a pretty close second, and I know it's not like the popular fight or whatever to choose, but honestly, the rematch between Jose Luis Castillo and Diego Corrales, like I know everybody remembers the knockout, which is fair, and it also is kind of tainted because of the whole weight thing. But dude, it was actually a really good fight for as long as it lasted. And it's not just the fight, but also like the event and the experience because I was there in Vegas for it with like there was a ton of fucking people that I knew, and so that was definitely up there. But as far as just kind of taking away the experience type of thing and being in Vegas or whatever, um, probably the Vasquez Marquez trilogy, dude. Um,
Were you
I
there for anything?
yes, yes. I
Oh,
no, just the third fight.
well, I mean, that
Um,
was the best one of the bunch, in my
yeah,
opinion.
don't get me wrong. You're like only the third fight. No, I was there for the third fight, and that was the best. How I'm like getting flustered even just trying to get my brain working to my mouth to say this, but it's like, how does the first fight? It's so good. And then the second fight's better. And then the third fight just goes, yeah, second fight, fuck you. And just is even better. Or you, how? How is that possible?
That
Dude, there's,
third fight was bananas, yo. That last round solidified everything. Like that was incredible.
I almost got like my ass
How close
kicked.
were you? Were like, how many rows back were you?
We were, dude, I was this, another fortunate. We had a friend. I still am friends with him, but he used to get us luxury boxes at Home Depot Center, then Home Depot
Oh,
Center.
that's
So we were in one of those little boxes, free fucking food and booze and shit. And so you aren't that close, but at that venue, there's literally no bad seat. You could see it great at anywhere. Um, but I mean, I almost got my fucking ass kicked because going into the 12th round, I was so hyped because the fight was so wild and I was like, this is probably the best fight I've ever fucking seen live. Oh my God. And I remember there was like a whole row of like massive, like Mexican looking dudes right next to the box. And they're just like silent. And I looked over and I was like, what's wrong with you guys? And one of the dudes stood up, like he was like, took serious offense to me saying that. And my friends were like, yo, 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 yo. And I was just like, I'm just
what are they gonna beat you up for?
I don't know. I guess they just were mad
They
that I
marked
was
it?
calling them out for not being excited about this crazy fight we were watching. I mean, I wasn't calling them out. I was just like, "Yo, what are you guys doing? Like, are
Oh
you all
yeah.
not excited by this?" And anyway, luckily nothing happened. Thank goodness. I would have gotten fucking destroyed. But the point is, anyway, the whole experience behind like all those fights and just kind of embodying so much about a lot of the things great and unfortunately some of the things really bad about boxing, and I call it the trilogy too. There's four fights between them, but I don't even count the fucking fourth one. They get fucked so badly in the first three fights by the promoters that they had to fight a fourth unnecessary time to get paid right. That's what I mean by it embodied so many good things about boxing, but a number of bad things too. That these three fighters, one fucking doesn't even have an eye anymore because of those fights. And, you know, and with all due respect to him, because I love him, but Israel Vasquez looks awful. And a lot of it, and some people will try to say, oh, that's independent from boxing. He has some disease that's, degenerative. You don't think it has something to,
I mean, he
really?
took some vicious punishment, and
Yeah,
he
you
had
don't think these
multiple
two are,
surgeries on his eyes
you
during his
don't,
career.
what's that?
Didn't he have surgery on his eye during his career?
He had a detached retina. He had severe scar tissue that he got fixed. I think a handful of times over his eye. Dude, he doesn't even have an eye there anymore. Like he's got a fake eye, and he looks, like I said, with all due respect, awful. Like, and again, I know that that's its own. He has a separate, but dude, is he being taken care of financially? Anyway,
Boxing.
sorry. I don't want to get into too much about that because I don't want to turn into a badness. But I mean, the point is, like, I do look at it that way though. Like I do see the good and the bad, and I do see some, a lot of the things that we love is, does need to be examined on the other side too. But point is, that trilogy was amazing, dude. And Showtime also invested into that trilogy when HBO refused.
Yeah.
HBO refused the first fight and they said, we're not paying that. And it was like some like bargain basement. It was like 750 grand or something. It was something crazy. And they were like, that fight's not worth that. And Showtime was like, yes, please. Sure as
Eric
fuck was.
Davis era, ladies and gentlemen.
Yeah, they wouldn't do anything. Basically, it wasn't one of their stars that wouldn't do anything. But that trilogy, amazing. And I'm super fortunate to have been there for the third one.
Sure, that's an incredible fight to be at. I think I have the credential for it because I was supposed to go, but I didn't end up going. Um,
What about you, dude? I mean, do you
I mean,
uh,
like, well, ringside, I was able to see like some cool shit. Like, being ringside for the Super Six was pretty cool, just to like, because that was a huge event. You know what I mean? Um, Anytime you went to Canada for a Stevenson fight was massive for the fact that like, look, even if it wasn't a big fight, like, there's something about those fans that are just like those dudes are wild out
they
there.
turn
People,
up, dude?
they turn up. They really, really do. Like, and to sit there and get an atmosphere of what they like bring in is just kind of like you're like, whoa, you know what I mean? Like it's heavy. They're That's their big thing. And to sit there even when it's freezing cold, but like to witness that type of stuff is like, it's cool. Um Being ringside for a bunch of showbox shows was always like a pleasure, but just like memories of myself, like if I think like my favorite Showtime memories, they go back to when I was a kid, Chavez getting dropped for the first time when he lost to Frankie Randall, for instance. For a number of reasons. Like, Chavez was looked upon as being almost invincible, even though he was showing kinks in his armor, and like Pernell Whitaker clearly got robbed against him in a fight that was shown by Showtime pay-per-view. And that's a story in itself, actually, too. Whitaker being an HBO fighter, wanted the Showtime, wanted the Chavez fight so badly that he went over to Showtime to fight on their network, albeit pay-per-view, and fighting Chavez in San Antonio on top of that. Almost like, a death sentence, but still um, winning that fight, like dominating enough to show that, like, even if it was a draw, that he clearly won that fight. But when Chavez fought a guy like Randall, Randall was one of those longtime contenders who, throughout the 80s and early 90s was always one of those guys near the top of the division, but was always kind of denied a title shot. Had a couple of losses that derailed him when it could have, like, propelled him instead. And like, you knew he was a good fighter, but you just really didn't know how great he could be because he just never really got the opportunity to prove himself like that. And when he finally fights Chavez, Chavez was in the midst of one of those guys that, like, he was at this point that he became what De La Hoya would end up becoming, if you agree with me, Pat, in the sense that, like, his middling title defenses on middling title defenses weren't going to be on Showtime anymore. They would still be on pay per view. It wouldn't be a big pay per view, but they would still be on pay per view. Like, for instance, like Chavez, not for instance, like excuse me, like De La Hoya against like Wilfredo Rivera, for instance, right? Like a fight that should be on HBO that ends up becoming a pay per view. Chavez against Frankie Randall, which you would think should be normally on just the network, is a pay per view. So that's what he was kind of doing. Guys like him, David Kamau later on, and stuff like that. You know what I mean? I think Terrence Ali, I don't know if that was on Showtime or pay per view, whatever it may be, but like it's stuff like that. So the fact that he fights them, they're going through and it's a close ass fight, and like, Randall is doing a lot better than anyone ever anticipated. Chavez, even though he's a little bit slowed down, is like clearly struggling here. And then that magical moment when, what was it, round 11, bop, 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 he hits him with that right hand and Chavez just falls. And Steve Alba with the best call, and down goes Chavez for the first time in his career. Like, and you hear Bobby Ches, your favorite guy, oh, I can't believe it, can't believe it. Oh. And then Ferdy Pacheco in the most deadpan voice, oh, it's good time, it's goodbye title, Bobby. But like,
Ches would always have some like weird, like, it's over. That's it. There's no more to this. That's it.
well, yeah,
Like,
because
what are you
Chavez got up,
talking
even
about?
though he clearly wasn't that hurt. Like, yeah, he was stunned, but he wasn't out. And then you hear him, I can't believe it. Chavez is really hurt. His legs are gone. This is crazy.
He's
And
gonna get up and go into a knockout or something like that. And you're like,
but he
no,
had that
what?
voice, like that kind of like Horse's voice that he did. Like, it was
Yeah.
very distinct. He
Kind
had that
of
very distinct voice.
staccato mumbling type of thing he did. It's
Yeah.
fucking weirdo.
But I mean, that was incredible to watch. Like, again, I'm still a young fan. And to see my dad absolutely lose it because he wasn't a Chavez fan at this point, considering how he was whining, for various things in that fight and like all that. So to see him react, to see others react, like that was a big moment for me. You know what I mean? Like
Yeah,
and
that's
that was
true.
definitely like one of those shapers in my career as a fandom where I was just like, wow, I love this sport now. And then we recorded it. Like we had it on VHS. He recorded that one, and on the undercard was a young Felix Trinidad against Hector Camacho. And I would actually watch that fight, even though there's nothing to talk about with it. Really isn't anything besides that they both wore trunks of, like, represent the Puerto Rican flag. I always watched it over and over because like I was excited. But then you have that another memory, like one of my favorites. Um, which one was it? Frankie Lyles, the Tim Little's their second fight. You know, as a kid, I had watched a couple of Lyles fights, and I wasn't like overly excited to watch him. I knew what I was getting with him. Tim Little's, I didn't watch the Tony fight at this point. I had read about him a lot, and all the pre-fight announcements that they were talking about was that it was going to be a very tactical, boring affair. So I was just ready to be like, oh, okay. As a kid, just like sit back and whatever I was gonna deal with. You know what I mean? Probably end up walking, playing with some toys or some shit at some point. But instead, they ended up having a fucking street fight, that no one anticipated. Littles, for whatever his reason, was very unnerved about a lot of things and just came in there and started throttling Lyles with like body slams and rabbit punches and low blows and everything else in between, which unnerved Lyles enough that he was forced to like, fight a fight that he wasn't used to and like, lay out some bombs and all that. And it became a fucking firefight. I know you love the fight too, right?
Dude, they fucking yeah. Frankie Lyles was a he was a guy that a lot of people thought was going to go a lot farther too. Like, I mean, with all due respect, I don't mean to be like
He was one of those guys that was stuck on those Don King undercards that we were like forced to watch on Showtime this in purgatory, just
yeah, he was a big amateur standout and had a bunch of credentials and shit. He was big. He was New York guy, right?
I don't think so.
No,
Could have been. I have to look it up. I'm not
well, and
sure.
then wherever he was from, I remember he
Find
was a
out
big
actually.
he
Find
was
that out.
he was a big amateur standout. I remember he was like at the time he was like supposed to, he was expected to do a little bit more than he did, but dude, fucking Tim Littles, bro. Yeah.
Oh
He
yeah,
was
Syracuse, New York. You're right. There we go.
I thought it was like New York, so I guess
No,
it's
no, sorry,
not
but I mean,
totally
he
the
was
same.
always based in like Vegas.
Yeah, not totally the same. Not exactly a New York guy, but regardless. Yeah. Yeah, that's a good one. That's a memory that nobody's going to be bringing up.
No, I mean, like that was just one of those as a kid, because like you're watching it, and then like first round with Littles, start slamming in, they go around. Lyles drops him early. He's just very like they're going in. Eddie Futch is clearly probably having his head go like exploding, right? Because he's Littles' trainer, and he's a guy that like kind of tries to keep composure and like relaxation in his corner and stuff like
Poor
that.
Mitch Halpern having to control this
Yeah.
action.
And then it ends with it, and not only because like I'm not just to say like Littles didn't do anything besides like roughhouse him. Like he did hurt Lyles. He dropped him. He landed some good punches. It was a fucking brawl. And at the end, Lyles landed one of the most precise one punch knockouts you could see of this, the modern era. Just with a beautiful hook that Littles walked right into and flagged him. And like as a kid, I was like, yo, that was fucking awesome. I love that fight. That like I'll always go back on, and watch that with fondness because they initially just hearing the pre-fights about it, and rightfully so, considering their backgrounds, you think it was going to be boring. And instead, it ended up being an absolute street fight that I was like, man, this is incredible. This is cool. And it might be cliche to say, but like the first Tyson Holyfield fight, as a kid, excuse me, as a kid, I never admit this on Twitter or anything like that because who would believe you or even think about it? But like amongst my friends, I was the only one that picked Holyfield to win that fight. And I had a simple logic. I wasn't no knowledgeable boxing fan that had all this insight into it and thinking to myself, oh yeah, I know all this kind of crap or whatever. All I knew as a fan at that point was Tyson had just come back. What I had seen him do in this comeback, he didn't look good at all against Buster Mathis. Like I saw that at much. He didn't have to do anything against Bruce Seldon or Frank Bruno. So I just put logic together. I was like, Holyfield hasn't been looking great either, but if he can get past 4 rounds, I think he can beat him because Tyson hasn't been 4 or 5 rounds. And I think he's going to, like in my mind, I was like, I think he's going to struggle if he can't go past 5 rounds because, like, the fuck has he been doing, right? And I told everyone that, and everyone's just like, oh man, you kidding me? Tyson's going to murder him, and blah, blah, blah. And I get it. Like Ring Magazine predicted in their preview, the one with the cover of them face to face of the cartoon, they said that he was going to knock him on the first round. Eddie Futch was quoted in that saying that he was afraid Holyfield was going to get like legitimately killed. Everyone else was saying that he was going to lose, except for like one guy linked with the Holyfield camp.
There's a lot of revisionist history, bro. That fool was a massive favorite for. I mean, I'm not saying that they were correct in making him a massive favorite, but I'm saying it was for a reason, and it wasn't
No,
just
there was a
one
total
person thinking
hatred.
this.
And again, I'm not trying to say that I was some kind of fucking like Eddie Futch,
No,
Ray
there were
Elson.
people who called it.
I just had an idea that like all I said was like if he can go past 4 rounds, I think he's going to beat him. And no one believed me. And then he went past 4 rounds and beat his ass. And I was just like, wow. And that again, that like pushed me as a boxer fan more because I was like, holy crap, I got that right. Like, you know what I mean?
And you know
That's
what's crazy, dude? In my opinion, just to cut you off slightly, in
no, no,
both
let me
in
know.
both fights, I do think that Mike Tyson did a little bit better than people like remember. If you look early in both fights, he was actually doing okay.
Dude, yeah, absolutely. And he was landing bombs that would take out most heavyweights too, man.
He
Holyfield
was
had
doing all right.
yeah. Holyfield had the type of resolve that, like, well, one, he was coming off the heart issue, and then we didn't know that he had hepatitis, and that's why you had the topsy turvy result with Bo and all this stuff. So I get, and then the uneven performance with Bobby Ches. Yeah, he stops him, but he didn't look good, right? I think my reaction why I picked him is because I wasn't that experienced in studying fighters like that at that point. Like I didn't see him when he fought Ches that looked like he was shot to bits. I was like, I don't know, he beat him, he beat him up, whatever, right? I was more intrigued by Ray Mercer and Lennox Lewis, anyways. So I didn't even think twice about that fight after he beat him to think back and be like, whoa, he looked really bad against Bobby Ches. He's gonna get killed against Tyson.
Yeah.
I just figured Tyson hasn't done shit himself. Holyfield's the first legit
Oh,
guy he's
bro.
gonna fight. If he can go past 5 rounds, he's gonna beat him. And then he did. And I was just like, I don't know, that just like inspired me more to think like this is my sport because like I got this right. And then I definitely threw that in my friends' faces and my boxing trainer who questioned me. like,
Yeah,
and
I didn't make a pick for the fight, but I remember telling you that my parents used to go out of town like on cruises or whatever every so often. And at one time I left at my stepsister's house and we were watching Tyson Seldon and everybody was so fucking pissed because they were like, that shit was
the
fixed,
fuck
it was
was
fucked
that?
up, blah, blah, blah. So dude, a lot of people forget about that shit.
That was one of the most atrocious fights you can ever see, bro. I mean, he clearly, I'm
He
not even,
bowed out, bro. He bowed out.
yeah, that's not even worth bringing up right now. But I mean, like, that whole era was just fascinating. You got that, and then, like, the bite fight afterwards. So, like, the whole Tyson era was just fascinating because Showtime provided you that whole time of him, like, that
And
was,
they might have kind of taken a slight reputational hit because of that too, going into the 2000s because of
yes.
their willingness to keep broadcasting Mike Tyson fights when bro, you remember at the time, dude, Time magazine, fucking People magazine, every fucking major publication was like, he's a thug, he's a fucking murderer, he's an awful, everybody was really jumping on that narrative. And I'm not saying it's right or wrong. I'm simply saying that like Showtime going up against that, dude, it was kind of an uphill battle for them, I think.
To a degree, but you got to remember, this is like the late
Yeah,
90s,
yeah,
early.
don't get me wrong. They profited. I'm just saying.
Yeah, 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 because, like, that was the one era where all the salacious, crazy shit that you want, that's like so, what the hell? You want to show that because like people were like
Exactly.
for it.
You can't not show it.
That was the Jerry Springer crazy era where like we thirsted for like wild content. And Tyson, now I haven't talked about the bite fight, immediately coming back and try to break Franz both his arm
Yeah.
or he did it
Going
just
after Savarese when the
go
ref
back to
and then
Sever.
knocking the ref down.
you
Bro,
know,
people hated him for like
fucking
5
hitting
years
Orlin
straight.
Norris after the break and poor Orlin popping his knee or whatever
Oh,
happened.
geez, yeah, and basically ending his career. Bro, people hated Mike
I'm
Tyson for like
sorry, there
5
was so
years
much
straight.
crazy shit that happened.
Yeah, yeah, it's almost like a wonder how the fuck did was he what? How does he not go back to jail? Jesus
Late '90s
Christ.
Tyson was such a wild time, bro.
Bro, you
Like,
remember motherfuckers would just randomly try to pick fights with him on the street too? Like every other week he was in the fucking news because there was some guy just like trying to fight him. Like, can
what
you
a
imagine?
wild,
Like you're just walking down the street and you
yeah,
see
yeah,
Mike
yeah.
Tyson, you're like, "What's up, Mike? What
Early, yeah, that was
the
such a
fuck?"
crazy era, absolute crazy era. But like,
People were crazy.
again, Showtime at that point was still they just had a lot of stuff that they were just showing. Like, this wasn't one of my highlights because considering what happened, but like I remember watching Ben McClellan with my dad. Like I just a lot of bonding happened watching those fights, whether they were good ones or just like shitty ones. I never thought in my mind that I would be actually like contributing and doing the stats for those fights one day. That's how it all kind of came to, you know what I mean? Like, um, also worth mentioning too in their history, like they were the ones that early in their career they aired Iron Barkley, Thomas Hearns, their first fight. Like that was another one, that has to be
I don't
mentioned.
want to talk about
I mean, no, I got a fucking tattoo of Tommy Hearns. You think I want to talk about it either? But like, it has to be mentioned that like early in their
never
career,
happened
yeah, right. There was some wild moments there. And
for
then
sure.
so I'm always gonna be fond of that type of stuff. There was like again, they introduced me to Hamed. Like, before HBO picked him up for the Kevin Kelly fight, we watched Hamed against Daniel Alisea, and then you watched him struggle against Manuel Medina. And
In your hometown,
yeah,
December, Madison Square Garden, you get
yeah, yeah.
knocked out.
Like you had those guys like Wilfredo Vasquez, who, to his credit, was featured on HBO against Orlando Canizales, but then got relegated back to Showtime. We saw a show. Showtime would air those guys. That's all I'm trying to say is that like they would just air the fights that normally you wouldn't see. Charles Brewer, one of my all-time favorites as a kid, his
The hatchet.
fight, the hatchet. Yeah, he was on Showtime. Vasquez, when he knocked out Aloy Rojas, one of my favorite knockouts of all time. And as an early, fan, that was on Showtime when like Mitch Halpern, God bless him, like people, whatever you want to say, whatever, like
Boop.
yeah, he was such a great referee that like when Rojas gets hit with a bop, bop, and starts like Halpern just grabs him like a kid, like about
Yeah,
to fall off
he almost
the cliff.
gets
And
hit like around Halpern, almost like
yeah,
it's like
dude, this
around
is
his
like
head, and
Halpern.
he's like
Halpern grabs
cradle.
the way Halpern grabs him as a kid, I thought Halpern actually hit him initially. That's like his
Yeah,
arm goes.
he like cradled him. He was like, boom, gotcha. It's like the shit that you see now in like the Muay Thai shit that like goes fucking viral, and the refs are like catching the knock. He did that, He was the start.
And sorry, sorry for the listeners right now for me like jumping around to all kinds of different things, but like there was
That's what
just
the
so many.
episode's for.
This is what happened like during this era that like I remember. Like Showtime was just great for that. So
Well, and and I'm not one of those people who's gonna fucking shake my, you need to be grateful because I talk shit and whine and complain as much as anybody, but no, I mean I do think we should at least recognize what Showtime brought to the equation for almost 40 years in boxing, and that, bro, I'm trying to think off the top of my head. I want to say it was like 12 years or something like that. Gillette Friday Night Fights. Yeah, they were only on for like 12 years. So comparatively, I mean, Showtime's been on for almost
I didn't
40
even know.
years, bro.
Yeah,
Like it's crazy. So they definitely have their share of,
the end of an
bringing
era.
us memories, dude.
Yeah, it's just it's sad. Like HBO and the other networks, like we grew up in there's different generations of fight fans, and whether they came up or whether they started watching, whatever it may be. And a lot of these current fans on Twitter who are younger, just kind of grew up in the era that they're doing right now. Like, yeah, they had Showtime, but like they don't really remember the golden years or like the golden years
Yeah,
of
who's
HBO.
going to be talking about the golden years of the zone? You know what I'm saying? Like, with all due
I
respect,
Yes, I couldn't tell you. Nah, the fight starts now. No, I don't know.
the fight. No, I'm not going to do that. Fucking guy.
Please don't.
No, not finishing it.
It's still the
Uh,
holidays, man. Spare the fans.
I said no.
But um it's just one of those things that feels like an end of an era. And whether you came of age as a fan during this time, before this time, or whatever, it's been with you for all these years. And you hold near and dear all these memories and the recaps of reading it up in the magazines and all this shit. And it's kind of like, damn, man, look, boxing's always going to evolve. That like this is the sport that will never die. As much as like other people will try to say, okay, it's ending, it's done, and yada 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 bullshit, blah 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 blah. The sport's never going to end. We already know that, and both of us are thankful for that. Everybody that listens to the show and all boxing fans are thankful for that because we know that, and it evolves. You know what I mean? Like PBC, who was the main provider for Showtime, that they've already moved on. They got a new deal, and we're just going to figure out how it goes, into 2024. But it's still sad, and it still sucks because like it's the end of an era when it comes to the networks and what we grew up on and what we were appreciative of, and the announcers and the history and the fights and all that. But I'm always going to stay optimistic, and I'm always going to stay good, and to see where we can go with this. And I know you are too. So like, it is what it is.
Almost 40 years, dude. That's a lifetime.
Yeah.
Um, Fighters, fans, media people have been born and died in that time. People
I
who've
just
been in.
wish more was available on YouTube, and it was until haters decided to jump in and report those accounts.
Yeah, well, and that kind of goes, I guess, with what I was saying earlier. I wish there were a little bit more. Dude, broadcast rights are a bear when it comes to legality. I know that, and so I'm not ignorant to it. I'm just saying I wish in a more ideal world we would have greater immediate access to without having to pay a fucking arm and a leg to a lot of this history. And that's part of the reason why so many people are ignorant to it. We're doing our best to raise awareness, and we're doing our part to pass this on and pass on the memories, and kind of look into facts and behind the scenes. We're doing what we can, but it would be really helpful to have more. So that part kind of sucks, but we'll always have Paris. We got those memories, man.
Yeah, exactly. Exactly.
Well, dude, I appreciate it, dude, because it's not like it was homework. It was fun, recalling, reminiscing, but still, I appreciate it, bro, because you got to kind of reach deep into the recesses of your memory for some of this stuff.
Always. But that's what a history account does, right?
For sure, bro. Well, again, I appreciate it, and everybody who listened in. I know that if you're a listener, there has been issues with accessing the podcast lately. That's going to change in the new year. I gotta update some shit. It's just going to take time, and it sucks, and I've been putting it off, but I will do it for the new year. That said, if you do listen in, we appreciate you. Go ahead and subscribe on whatever platform you listen in, and go ahead, leave us a comment and rating, those kinds of things. As far as YouTube, if you watched, again, also thank you. Subscribe, leave a comment. I'll thumbs up it or something like that, or avoid it because I'm anti. So some of those types of things. But Eris, appreciate you again. My buddy Eris is on social media for now, still on X/Twitter as Punch Zone Eris. I'm there as the Boxing History account, but also Knuckles and Gloves podcast is on Facebook and Instagram if you want to follow us there. And we'll see you there, Eris. We'll talk soon, bro.
Happy New Year, everybody.
Indeed. Happy New Year. Happy holidays, everybody. Stay safe.